Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Shavuot at Home series of programs tonight. We're all in for just a fabulous night of engagement, of education, of music, and of really great teaching from all of our clergy tonight. And we begin by saying Chag Sameach. It is the first night of Shavuot. Shavuot literally means weeks. It has that name because it is exactly 7 weeks to the day from Passover. And in a way, over the years, Shavuot has kind of taken a back seat to the other major festivals of the year. Pesach, Passover, is known as Hechag, the holiday. Shavuot has suffered, I think, a little bit over the years because of its proximity to the much more popular Pesach. Also to Sukkot, our fall festival. Of course, Sukkot has the Sukkah and the Lulav and the Etrog, and Passover has the Seder. What is there for Shavuot? Well, it is also known as Zaman Matan Toratenu. It is the time of the giving of the Torah. So Shavuot became, over the centuries, associated with the Torah and the centrality of the Torah and its teachings. One of the reasons why on Shavuot we chant the 10 Commandments. A little bit more of that later in the show. But for now, since it is the evening of the festival, we're going to begin with lighting our festival candles. So if you have your candles ready, now is the time to light them. Gather around. Let's see if my lighter doesn't seem to want to work, but let's see if I can fix it. Well, so much for the lighter. But in the meantime, imagine that you are now lighting your candles. And we're going to say the blessing together. But instead of Shabbat, we say the words Shel Yom Tov for a holiday. And we bring the light in. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Yom Tov. And now we'll take our cups of wine or grape juice, our Kiddush cups, and in a moment you'll see the text for the Kiddush on your screen. And in preparing for that, just a word about the melody for the Kiddush on a festival. It's different than Shabbat because each of these festivals has a special melody attached to them. Every holiday, every moment of the day, special melodies. So we need to see our Kiddush text now on our screen so that we can all join together. And I hope we can get that up in a second or two. Here we go. So I'll make it as big as we can. So everyone raise your cups and join with me in the special melody for Shavuot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri agafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol am v'romamanu mikol hashon v'kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'atiten lanu Adonai Eloheinu be'ahava moadim l'simcha chagim uzmanim l'sason את יום חג השבועות הזה, זמן מתן תורתנו, מקרא קודש, זכר יציאת מצרים. כיוונו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ומועדי קודשך בשמחה ובששון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל והזמנים. And now we include the words of Shehachiyanu, since it is the first night of a festival. We join. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehachiyanu v'kiyamanu v'hi'anu lazman hazeh. Amen and l'chaim. In a moment, we'll just begin a little bit of our festival evening service, and it really just to teach some of the melodies that are traditional to an evening service when it is a festival. And the best prayer to teach that melody is the Baruch Hu. I know many of you have taken classes with me or been a mitzvah parents when we have our meetings to discuss the liturgy and our music. The Baruch Hu is the official beginning of every service, and because that is the case, the melody we sing for Baruch Hu identifies the moment in time, whether it's morning or evening, whether it's a weekday or Shabbat, whether it's a festival, Shavuot, Pesach, or Shmini Atzeret or Sukkot, or the high holidays. Baruch Hu identifies that moment in time by a few notes. Right? So we know on Shabbat evening, Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. On Rosh Hashanah, Baruch Hu. On the three festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, this is the melody for the Baruch Hu in the evening service. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. And the response would be, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Don't try that at home, it's very dangerous. But that is the traditional sound of Baruch Hu for the evening of one of our three ancient pilgrimage festivals, all having to do with the harvest. Pesach, the spring planting season, Shavuot, the ingathering of the spring harvest, and Sukkot, the fall planting season from ancient times. Now, we're going to put up on the screen in just a moment the text of the Ten Commandments. As we mentioned earlier, Shavuot became known as Zaman Matan Toratenu, the time for the receiving or the giving of the Torah. That is the legend, that on Shavuot, Moses received the Ten Commandments. But before we see that text, the sages had many explanations that go into immense detail having to do with the teaching and the understanding of the Ten Commandments and what the actual origins of the Ten Commandments were. I'm going to show you now one possible explanation for why we have 10 commandments or 10 sayings, the Aseret HaDibrot. Take a look and we'll talk on the other side.
Moses went to the mountain, and God spoke unto him.
Moses, this is the Lord thy God, commanding you to obey my law. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. A deaf man could hear you.
What?
Nothing, Gonish, forget it. Oh, Lord, why have you chosen me? What would you have me do for you?
I shall give you my laws, and you shall take them unto the people.
Yes, Lord! Lord, I shall give these laws unto thy people. Hear me! Oh, hear me! All pay heed! The Lord Jehovah, has given unto you these 10 commandments for all to obey.
Now, I don't think there's any scholarly or archaeological evidence to prove that that is the way that we received the Ten Commandments. But Shavuot is also a joyous holiday, and I thought we'd include just a little bit of humor, a little biblical humor. But as I mentioned, the Ten Commandments are central, and the Torah itself is central to the Chag, to the festival of Shavuot. And in a moment, we'll see the Ten Commandment text. And again, we're going to explore just for a few moments the musical tradition of chanting those Ten Commandments. There are two versions of the Ten Commandments in the Torah. One is in the book of Exodus in Parashat Yitro, where we first received the commandments. Then again later in the Torah in the Parsha of V'etchanan. And believe it or not, these two versions of the Ten Commandments are not identical. There are a few key words that are different, yet we have them both in the Torah. But the sages, many, many centuries ago, chose to use the one in Parashat Yitro to be recited on the festival of Shavuot. So if we can see that text now, we'll take a look and engage a little bit in the what I find fascinating tradition when it comes to the chanting of the Ten Commandments. You'll notice at the top of the screen it says the Decalogue, the 10 sayings for public reading. So when you see public reading, it might imply that, well, there's a private reading. There must be if they're saying this is public. And that is indeed the case. So the tradition is that when you read the Ten Commandments at home and you study them in your Chumash and your Torah commentary, the trope signs and the sentence markings are of a certain set. But when we read it out loud publicly in the synagogue, we follow a different set of trope or cantillation that allows for the Ten Commandments to be recited almost in one breath with very few pauses. Right? One in Hebrew is known as Ta'am Ha'elyon, which means the trope of the upper case, upper tropes. The other was Ta'am Ha'tachton, the ones that are underneath. Fortunately, in the edition we're looking at now, it only has the upper version, which is the way we chant it on Shavuot. So, fascinating tradition with regards to how the Ten Commandments are actually chanted, differently for private study as opposed to the public reading. And right now, I want to direct our attention to the bottom third of your screen, the last set of the Ten Commandments, beginning in what is verse 12. Kabed et avicha v'et imecha, the famous statement, you shall honor your father and honor your mother. And then we have, and you'll notice the spacing, there's lots of open space. In the actual Torah scroll, there are big empty spaces there. Many explanations for that. One, when we get to these negative commandments, we call them negative commandments because they're all the don't do this and don't do that commandments, as opposed to you shall do. Lo tirtzach, lo tin'af, lo tignov, right? You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. Those have the big gaps. And one might wonder why that is. Perhaps so we should spend a little more time reflecting on each one of those very dangerous commandments not to do things. Right? So let's take a moment. I'm going to chant for you now this last section, beginning with Kabed et Avicha. כבד את אביך ואת אמך, למען יאריכון ימיך על האדמה, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך. לא תרצח, לא תנאף, לא תגנוב, לא תענה ברעך עת שקר, לא תחמוד בית רעך, לא תחמוד אשת רעך, ועבדו ואמתו ושורו וחמורו וכל אשר לרעך. Torah trope, with all of that spacing and time in between. Take an extra moment when we get to the Ten Commandments. And by the way, there is the tradition that when we do recite the Ten Commandments in temple, the congregation is asked to stand. And so, we take a moment to stand and we toast the Ten Commandments, the centerpiece of the center of Judaism, which is the Torah. And we also toast the festival of Shavuot, this festival of weeks, which is Zaman Matan Torotenu. For many years, I'm sure many of us also realized that confirmation became attached to the festival of Shavuot, which makes wonderful sense since we celebrate learning and Torah and commitment to study of Torah on Shavuot. And for many of us, many congregations all over America, confirmation has been attached to and associated with the festival of Shavuot. And so I'm just going to open up just for a few minutes. If anyone has a comment or a question, you can type something in the chat room. And if not, we'll in a few moments get ready to continue our discussion a little bit with some of the other traditions, the musical traditions, liturgical traditions of the festival of Shavuot. So Rabbi Nanis is asking, what about the Haftarah? So there are a variety of traditions regarding Shavuot and liturgical musical traditions. On Shavuot, good. Why do people study all night? Well, I'll answer that first. A tradition arose called Tikkun Le'el Shavuot, where in honor of the Torah, you would stay up all night studying the entire Torah in honor and respect of the Torah and of this festival dedicated to the study of Torah. Right? Now back to the Haftarah. There is a specific Haftarah assigned to Shavuot, but in addition to that, there's a special biblical reading and a set of special prayers. On the festival of Pesach, we recite this prayer called Tal, which means dew, the prayer for dew, a beautiful ancient poem that is in praise of dew, and may we have dew, may we have moisture for the spring growing season. And it too has a special melody. On Shmini Atzeret, in the fall, the conclusion of Sukkot, we have this beautiful poem called Geshem, the prayer for rain. May we have rain in the rainy season for the fall harvest to grow and be nurtured. And on Shavuot, we chant the Book of Ruth, which tells this beautiful, powerful, poignant story of Ruth and Naomi, one coming to Judaism out of love and devotion, and the rabbis interpret that as a love and devotion to the Torah itself. And the chanting of the Book of Ruth has its own beautiful sound. It's the same chant that we use for the Song of Songs on Pesach, and the book of Kohelet on Sukkot. So each of these three festivals has a special biblical text that is presented. And it begins, Vatomerut, al tifki v'liosvech, v'Elohayich Elohai. It's a beautiful, elegant, lyrical chant reserved for those three of the 5 scrolls. So this beautiful story of Ruth comes to also signify a devotion to the study of Torah, which we celebrate on Shavuot. Any other questions or comments? Any of our clergy or anyone else on the gallery have a question they'd like to ask or a comment they'd like to make about the festival of Shavuot and its traditions? And while I'm waiting for any of those comments or questions, another liturgical tradition we have on Shavuot, like the other major festivals, is we have Yizkor services, each of the 3 festivals. And Yizkor on Shavuot happens on the 2nd day. So you'll want to join us on the Shabbat morning for our Shabbat morning service, which will include prayers of Yizkor. Tomorrow night at our Friday night service, since it is still the holiday, the Chag, tomorrow night we'll combine Shabbat and Shavuot. And here's an interesting point, that tomorrow night, which Kiddush will we sing? The one for Shabbat or the one for Shavuot? And the answer is Shavuot. Because the things in Jewish life that happen infrequently take precedence over the things that happen more frequently. This coming year, Erev Rosh Hashanah is a Friday night. We don't sing the regular Shabbat Kiddush, we sing the Kiddush for Rosh Hashanah, which includes words for Shabbat. But still, the holiday, the thing that happens less frequently, has precedence. So I'm going to ask the same question, and that question was, why do we eat dairy on Shavuot? I'm going to call on, I want Rabbi Susan Nanis to come on. All right, so unmute yourself, Rabbi Nanis, and I want you to share your explanation of why it is we eat dairy on Shavuot.
We eat dairy on Shavuot because getting the Torah is as sweet as milk and honey. And it's compared to learning Torah is compared to something, you're tasting it. It tastes the learning like milk and honey. So we have milk, we eat something with milk. Right. Interestingly, I was teaching this to the Brahmin 3rd graders, and one of the kids said to me, well, but I'm lactose intolerant. She said, or he said, it was a boy. And I said, well, then you can have, soy milk or oat milk or almond milk. But that is one of the reasons. And traditionally we eat blintzes and cheesecake. Those are the top favorites.
Oh, I'm getting hungry right now.
Right. For also, Cantor, I heard another thing about Leil Tikkun Shavuot.
Yeah.
Tikkun means repair.
Right.
It's based on a midrash that during the 10 commandments that whole night that some of the Israelites fell asleep. And so we repair their mistake by staying up all night on Shavuot.
That may also be an explanation why the commandments went from 15 to 10, because it was too long and people were getting tired and falling.
Yeah, it could be.
Mel Brooks could have written that one too.
Yes.
Right?
Anyway. Yeah.
You could have told that kid, you don't have to eat milk and honey, but have a blueberry blintz with no cheese.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But those are wonderful explanations, and our tradition is fluid.
Yes, it is.
Yes, the Torah, we say in our tradition, was received, Sinai, at Mount Sinai for Moses, and dispersed to the generations over time. But it's also a living tradition, and it grows, and things are added to it all the time throughout history. I don't think it says in the Torah Yes, it does say, refer to Israel as Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Dvash, a land flowing with milk and honey, but
Right.
it doesn't say, and you shall eat dairy on Shavuot.
No,
That it does not say, right?
now a lot of our customs, were created by the rabbis.
Yes, they were.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're grateful to them because we love cheesecake. Right? A lot of
We do.
wonderful things. Yeah. I think somebody else might have had a question in the chat room. We'll see. One other thing I should mention from my scholarly side, the melodies you heard that we sang, like the Kiddush, when we have this melody, la 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 la, that melody is first attached to this bizarre, crazy poem that is included in the Shavuot Musaf service, the last service of the morning service in a traditional synagogue. It's this crazy poem written in Aramaic. It's called Akdamut. I don't know that anybody, maybe a few scholars in the world, really understand what it means, but it's this crazy story about a sea serpent, a leviathan. And that text to this day in traditional synagogues is chanted in the Musaf service, and the melody that attached itself to it was this tune. Lie, 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 lie. And that melody from Akdamut was then transferred over time to the other prayers chanted on the festivals, on Shavuot in particular. So that is why on Shavuot and the other Chagim we sing Kiddush and a few other central prayers to that ancient text. If you ever have a couple hours on a rainy day, you might want to pick up a copy of Akdamut and see if you could understand it. So Shavuot, in conclusion, has all these beautiful, wonderful traditions, liturgical traditions with poetry, music, customs. And for a long time, it's been the stepchild of the other two major festivals. And I think this is an opportunity for all of us really to learn more about it and create our own understanding and observance of this really beautiful, meaningful holiday. So thank you all for joining. Stay with us all night long and study with each of our clergy. Be engaged. And thank you for joining me. And now I'm going to hand it over to my dear colleague, Rabbi Susan Annis, who is a brilliant teacher. Be prepared to learn some things you had never known about before. Susan, all yours.
Thank you so much, Cantor.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. So nice to see you all this evening. So as you know, every half an hour, we're going to be studying something else. I'm just going to, let's see, make this a gallery view. Okay. And I guess, Don, you should turn off your camera. You did. Okay. So hold on. Let's see. Okay. So we're going through a hard time right now. And, some people are ill, some people have died. We're all frightened. And I thought it would be interesting to look at how the Jewish people dealt with disaster, catastrophe, trauma through the ages in our history. And this could be a whole course. So I'm going to do it on one foot, as they say. That's a famous saying about Rabbi Hillel. You can try say, the concise, just the core of the story. But I'm just going to tell you, and then we're going to go into detail, that the things that the Jewish people have done as a community and individually, they changed their way of thinking. Sometimes they changed the way they saw themselves. They changed their whole community and culture. They sometimes moved, changed their physical space. They changed their politics. They changed their leaders. They changed, actually, at one point, totally changed Judaism in order to accommodate and to adapt to the situation. So we start with the first huge trauma for the Jewish people, which was, and I know it seems a really long time ago, but it was the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE. Now, if you look in the Bible, you'll see in the writings at the end of the Hebrew Bible, there's one little book called Lamentations. And these are actual poems written at the time of the destruction of the temple. And you see the heartbreak and the trauma. And it was a horrible time. There was slaughter, there was captivity. They took the Jews as slaves. And also they destroyed the temple. Now, every country, every nation in those years, they believed that their God lived in their country. Israel had a Israel religion of the land of Israel, and God lived in the temple. And when the temple was destroyed, they actually sort of had a mass nervous breakdown because they felt that God now was gone. God had disappeared. God had no place to reside, and it was destroyed. And then they were being taken to another place. They were totally shattered physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And so they went to Babylon, and they had two choices. And they were now, their leaders had been priests. The priests now, a lot of them were killed, or the priests, basically worked in the temple. They didn't have, they didn't work with the people. They didn't engage on the level that the sages, the teachers did, and the scribes. And the scribes and sages sort of stepped up and started to engage with the community in Babylon. They first refocused and rethought of God. That was the first thing they had to do. They decided, or they understood, that this had to have happened because they did something wrong, that God had not abandoned them, that they could reconnect with God, and that God didn't only stay in the land of Israel, God could come with them. That was a pretty radical idea for that time, that your God wasn't just the God of your country, but the God of the people. And then this is when they created the synagogue. The synagogue was actually created for the first time in Babylonia because the people were so traumatized, they wanted to gather. And the word synagogue, and in Hebrew, it's the same word, Beit Knesset, means sort of a house of gathering. It wasn't necessarily a religious place. It was a place to get together. And they were so traumatized, and they would, the sages could teach them some Torah. And actually, in that time in Babylonia is when the sages put together the Torah as we know it now. They compiled it into the books, the first 4 books. The 5th book was found later. And for the first time, they created prayer, group prayer. Now, in the past, people could pray by themselves, but you did sacrifices. There were no sacrifices. So now, for the first time, there was prayer where people could come together, support each other. That we're still doing today. We pray together. We come to shul, and yes, the Zoom is one thing, and it's great, but we know that feeling when we're all praying and singing together. And the Amidah was written during that time in Babylon. So that was the thing they did. And when 70 years later, Babylon, which is Iraq, by the way, was conquered by Persia, Iran and Iraq. They were fighting then, they're still fighting. And the leader, Cyrus the Great, gave the Jews permission to return to their land. And when they went back, they ultimately rebuilt the temple, but they kept the synagogue. The idea of a community of not just going to the huge temple and letting the priest intercede for you and bring the sacrifice to God, but to have your own relationship with God, to have prayer, to have community. All of this was created in Babylonia and then continued to exist in the land. And scholars say that the religion of Israel changed to Judaism in Babylonia and in the return, after the return and the destruction. This is the beginning of Judaism because you didn't need it only to be in Judea. Don't forget that was the name of the country at that time, Judea. So that was all of those things: prayer, connection with God on a personal level, the Torah, starting to look at the Torah. And when they came back to the land with a leader named Ezra, he read the Torah and instituted that we would read, you read the Torah every Shabbat. So this was also the beginning of knowledge. Before, the Torah was kind of esoteric, secret knowledge kept by the priests and the sages and the kings, and now it was given to the people. So we see that to cope, we had community, we had a new way of thinking, we had a personal relationship with God and with each other, as opposed to just going to the temple and giving a sacrifice and coming home. And people started to become educated, started to study Torah on their own or at the temple. So we started to have an educated community, an educated culture. The next big trauma was the destruction of the second temple, which was in 70 AD. Now, the first temple, they got to go back to their land. The destruction in 70 AD was much more extreme. By that time, in like the 200 BCE, Alexander the Great had conquered Judea, but then the Romans took over, and now they were under Roman control. It was very cruel, very vicious, very scornful, and it was a really hard time. And the Jews were the only, or the first, the Judeans they were called, the first country in all of the Roman Empire to rebel against the Romans. The Romans had conquered the world all the way from Ireland to the edge of Persia and part of India, up to India. The whole world was conquered by the Romans, and the stubborn, crazy Judeans decided that they would have a rebellion. They had already been considered crazy because they didn't work one day a week. They let their slaves rest. They had all these bizarre customs. They had a god you couldn't see. Everybody thought they were a bizarre, strange sect. So what happened was they rebelled, and it was impossible, as we know, from the story of Masada, they couldn't possibly win. But during this time, there were different sects of Judaism, and the ones that we focus on are the rabbis. They were partly called the Pharisees, but really the rabbis. And there was one rabbi at that time named Yochanan ben Zakkai who saw the writing on the wall, saw that Judea is going to be destroyed. No way that they could possibly win against the Roman Empire. He pleaded with the rebels because the general Vespasian said, just put down your weapons and we'll call it a truce. And they were fanatics. The fighters were fanatics. The Judean fighters said, no, we're fighting, we're going to win. Of course, they didn't. And so Yochanan ben Zakkai realized that Judaism would be destroyed unless he did something. And so, and at this point, the rebels wouldn't even let you leave. They were holed up behind the walls of Jerusalem. They wouldn't let you leave. You said, I want to make peace. I want to get out of this war. They wouldn't let you. The only way you could get out is if you were dead. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had his students put him in a casket, and they went to the gate and they said, he died. We have to take him out and bury him. And they let him out. They said, we'll take out the body. And they carried the casket to the general Vespasian, and Yochanan Zakkai came out and he said, I know we're going to lose. I know that he predicted that Vespasian would become the next Caesar, the next emperor. And Vespasian knew that this man had tried to bring peace to the Judeans and no one would listen. He said, I want one thing. I want you to let me go to Yavne, which was a town about 15 miles south of Yaffo, so south of Tel Aviv today. And I want to start an academy, a learning center. And he let him go with his students. And basically, Yochanan ben Zakkai and the rabbis that went with him totally revamped Judaism. So this was the next thing. Judaism was centered, number one, on the temple, but then everybody was exiled. They were taken all over the world. And Rabbi Yochanan and his disciples and the rabbis that followed him, they rethought Judaism completely. They said, okay, the way we worship God is not going to work anymore. We have to make it portable, so you can be a Jew anywhere in the world. And that's the Mishnah, the Talmud was a writing down of all the laws. So the next thing they did is they wrote things down so that people would have kind of a map, a spiritual and a religious map of how to live their lives no matter where they were. So we're changing the way we think if we have to. We're getting educated and learning things that we didn't know before. We're recreating our lifestyle. And we're writing things down. We're giving ourselves direction and instructions so we can remember the way that we should live. So these are the things. And the writing of the Talmud actually took about 500 years because more and more rabbis kept adding to it. Some of them stayed in Babylonia. Some of them were in Israel. But the majority of Jews were taken as slaves and they were scattered all over the world. Europe, Spain, Spain is Europe, but Spain and Germany and France, and that is how the Ashkenazi and Sephardic communities started. They were taken in captivity, and they had this way to live. And most cultures, when their country is destroyed and overrun and the population is taken away in captivity, they disappear. But because these rabbis totally rethought Judaism as not just a national, it's like having America. I mean, we don't have a religion, but the American culture somewhere else, thousands of years later, if America was destroyed, would there be Americans 2,500 years later who still practiced whatever American culture is? That's what these rabbis did with Judaism. I mean, it's still a phenomenon in the world, how that we still practice some of the same things that our rabbis did, or our ancestors did 2,000 years ago. So that was the second big trauma. And so they rethought their lifestyle. They had to change the way that they practiced every part of their life, because now they were no longer in their country and they were no longer having this religious center. But it's beautiful that the synagogue went with them, prayer went with them. And I guess that's when they say, well, we can't be in Jerusalem, but we can look at Jerusalem when we pray, because we know that the custom is to face Jerusalem, to face east when we pray. So all the laws that we really follow in Rabbinic Judaism came from then. The next, I'm just checking on the time. Oh God. Okay, so there's a lot. So interesting though. I spent like 3 days reading all about this stuff. As we know, Jews had a pretty hard time up and down in Europe, whether under the Muslim rule was a little better, but not so great, or under, the Catholic Church, they were always the pariahs. There were times when they were able. Oh, someone has a question. If you have a question, can you hold on a minute? Let me see if I can do this participant question and attendees. How do I do this? I guess you can. I can't do that. If somebody wants to write in the question, please write it in, and then I'll look at the chat, because I can't seem to see anyone. I'd be happy to answer any question. Okay, so during that time, there were times when the Jews lived in peace, but basically in Europe, they were under the protection of the kings because they forced them to be moneylenders, and they would sometimes bankroll kings, bankroll nobles or whatever, but they were always despised, not really accepted. And ultimately, after the Spanish Inquisition, which we know about, and there was the Crusades, first of all, the Spanish Inquisition, a new concept, a new way of thinking. It says if a person raises their hand, I can call them. I can't see you, so you have to chat. You have to write me a question. I can't see people, unfortunately. Rodney, if you have a question, please write it in the chat, and then I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so the thing that then happened is people said it was time, we can't handle it anymore. We need the Messiah. We need somebody to save us. They looked for a savior. And that is how Kabbalah started to become popular. Because in Kabbalah, yet they felt your behavior and your intensity and your study and everything had meaning. In some way, you could bring the Messiah to save the Jewish people. And of course, it was the center of study of the Kabbalah was in Safat in Israel in the 1600s. And it was popular, but also people didn't really understand it. So there was a core group of people who were trying to bring about the Messiah. It didn't really, it was a philosophy that did not spread, that did not really work. And however, 100 years later, another kind of thinking did work, and that was the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement said you don't need to study so hard. It started to value the individual, the poor person. Up until now, there was a hierarchy where the scholar, the rabbi, the sage, they were considered more valuable, more important. But now this idea that every human being, that the poorest person is valuable, and that your heart and the goodness of your heart and your good deeds are the most important thing. And that was the idea of Hasidism from the Baal Shem Tov. Let me just get to my notes about this. It started in 1740, and they had some of the Kabbalah in it, but the thing that they brought, and here's something that we can use today as well, is they believed you have gratitude, you find the good even in the worst situation, and you have joy. You have joy. I'm looking to see, if you have a question, anyone who has a question, just write it in the chat and I will answer it. Because I'm not able to see you, unfortunately. I know you're there, but I can't see you because this is a webinar. It's not like a Zoom class. So if you want to ask me something or add something, I'd love to hear from you. So please feel free. They talked about the physical pleasure was important, joy was important, gratitude was important, and the Baal Shem Tov actually, and I want to share this with you, had a formula for when was the first time Jews were called Jews? Okay. They were called Jude in Hebrew as soon as, I would say, starting in they were the Israelites. I'm going to just go back to that. They were the Israelites. And then after King Solomon, which is in about 900 BCE, after he died, his son, who was a terrible tyrant, was such a bad leader that the country split in half like a civil war. So there was the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Judah were called Yehudim, or Jews, and the kingdom of Israel were probably called Yisraelim. Even though they had the same religion, it was like, the civil war, two countries, but different kings, different leaders. Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, the 10 lost tribes of Israel, they were bigger. They were conquered by the Assyrians in 40 BCE, and they disappeared. And all that was left was the country, the kingdom of Judea. And so the people were called in English Judeans, but in Hebrew, Yehudim, which is the word Jews. So maybe from around there, they were called Jews. So that is when we first started to be calling Jews, though they called the country of Judah, then the Romans called it Judea, but everybody was a Yehudi, which means a Jew. So about, 2,700 years ago is when we started being called Jews. So the Baal Shem Tov, the head of the Hasidic movement, had this three-pronged approach to how to deal with stress and fear that I think still works today. And I wanted to share this with you from the Hasidic movement. He said the first part of it is called hamna'ah, which means yielding or submitting. It means that we have to, first thing you have to do, and this applies today, we have to let go of the hope and expectations and dreams we had for the moment and soften to what is. We have to face reality and say, okay, this year I can't have my bar mitzvah in the sanctuary. I have to have it at home, or maybe I'll have it outside. This year I had a dream of traveling through Europe. I have to say I can't do it this year, maybe next year. So it's the first thing is to just soften yourself and face what's really happening right now. The next part is called Havdalah, or discernment, which Havdalah, like dividing, is when you see, you divide between reality and fiction. It's not like, oh my God, we're all going to die. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. You say, this is a tough time. I see what I can do. I see what I can't do. Okay, this is where I am right now. That's the second part. And I love the third part. The third part is called Hamtaka, which means sweetening. Sweetening means two things. What can I do to make this time better? And what do I acknowledge that is making this time sweet? I'm spending more time with my family. I'm seeing I'm Zooming with people that I haven't spoken to in years. I'm appreciating nature more. What is the sweetening? So we have yielding and softening, discerning, and sweetening. And that is what the Baal Shem Tov said it was a way to cope with our stress and disaster. I just want to check the time. Okay. So the next big trauma was really the pogroms and the Tsarist oppression. And this was after the Enlightenment, where Jews were allowed to finally go to college, be educated, and be accepted. But even despite that, there was this terrible, we know the Dreyfus affair. And so then people changed their politics. Some people became Zionists and believed in creating a Jewish state. Some people became communists or socialists and believed in trying to create equality for the whole world. Some people moved, they left and went to America, or, I mean, that was the dream place, the golden state, and left. And Judaism started fragmenting, and people were leaving Judaism. And also Hasidism at that point was getting very rigid, and it wasn't as appealing as it has been. And this is when, and I taught a class about this, so some of people know, the Musar movement started. And the Musar movement is this, it had existed before, but now it really came to the forefront, a movement of improving your own character. The idea that you could change the world by working on yourself, by looking at your flaws, looking at your extremes, and becoming a moderate person, analyzing, writing it down, meditating. So working on yourself. So from working as a community, that's one way that Jews dealt with trauma. And, now it's like working on yourself and the acknowledgement that every individual has something to offer and something to add to improve the world. And that was the Musar movement, which still exists today. And then the worst in our consciousness trauma of the Jewish people, of course, was the Holocaust. And that was many individual ways of coping. And we've heard amazing stories about survivors and how they coped. But I kind of analyzed the different ways that people retain their humanity. And one of the most amazing things, and this is something that we can learn from, is even in the worst times, they never gave up hope. That hope all the way through is a very Jewish thing. I've talked about this before. The name of the national anthem of Israel is Hatikva, which means the hope. That we hope for the Messiah, or we hope that we can make a change. They hoped for liberation. They hoped just for life. A thing that I heard many survivors saying is, as long as there's life, there's hope. They never gave up hope. And they had a vision of doing something for the future. I will tell the story for the future. There's that famous Emanuel Ringelblum in the Warsaw Ghetto that organized a group of people to write every single thing down, collect historical document they could. They said, if we don't preserve this, our story will not be told. It'll be told by the Germans. We need to tell our story. So they had a vision for the future, which has inspired us. And we found many, many of those documents. Or they devoted themselves to someone else, and we can learn from that as well. There's a very famous artist. She was in the Bauhaus. Her name was Friedel Dicker Brandeis. And when she was sent to Theresienstadt, she was a huge artist, very famous. She took art supplies with her. And she is the one who invented art therapy for children. And she created this magical world where she put sheets up and brought children inside so they could draw and soothe and help them get through the trauma. And so she thought about others. No, the word is Mussar, Mussar is the word. That is what I talked about earlier. And finally, the last thing that they did was they tried to find meaning, as we know from Viktor Frankl, who said, as long as you find meaning, you're free. They can't, so we need to find meaning even now in this coronavirus. So to conclude, and I have like 2 minutes, these are the things that we can learn from the Jews of the past. Open your mind to new ideas, adapt and create new modalities and answer the needs of your time. Be willing to start over and build from the bottom up if you have to, like the rabbis did after the destruction of the Second Temple. They totally revamped Judaism. Aspire to what seems impossible. That's what the Kabbalah did, and it uplifted many people. Be joyful, have gratitude, and look for the good in everything. Accept reality and work from there. Realize that what you do is important and can create huge change in the world. Have a vision of the future and work towards it. Care about others and try to make a difference even to one person. Value what you have and share it, and realize that you can create meaning, and that meaning will make you the person you aspire to be, no matter where or what. So that's my teaching for tonight. I want to invite Rabbi Eshel. Are you next? Hi.
I think so.
So there you go.
That's your car, Susan.
Thank you very much.
Oh, man. Yes, I agree with what Faith just wrote. Susan, you are just lovely.
Oh, thank you very much. So
Right, Faith?
I know I'm looking forward to hearing your talk about the 10 new 10.
Well, it couldn't have been any better to hear what you just said.
Thank you.
It could not have been any better, because now what we're going to do, well, I don't want to give it away, but I might just give away a little bit. We're going to do some. Okay, let me ask you this question. Do you know, what does it mean, im ein kemach ein Torah?
You're asking me?
Do we know what that means? Ein kemach ein Torah. Kemach is flour, like not Flower, but Flour, right? If you don't have flour, and that is parsed out to mean like sustenance, right? You can't have Torah, right? Because you need to be able to, feed yourself and take care of your initial necessities before you can open yourself up to learning. But at the same time, if you're not open to learning, and specifically the learning of Torah, you're not going to have the gratitude. You're not going to have the gratitude for the food, right? To take what you perceive to be mundane and really elevate it to make it holy. So, ein kemach ein Torah. We're about to take your Torah and make some kemach to then appreciate this.
I'm going to say goodbye, but I'm going to be listening.
Okay. Yes.
Everyone. Good
so,
job.
Faith just wrote over here. Faith, now you must compete with Susan. No, there is no competing with this fabulous human being. There is no competing. I am now just hoping to supplement and add a little bit to what beautiful Torah she just shared with us. So thank you, Susan. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Look at all these fabulous people. I am going to speaker view. Now for me, I want to pin myself, spotlight me. There we go. Fabulous. I just want to make sure that my screen is not frozen. So if anybody could just write to me right now, say, yes, we hear you, you're not frozen, that would be really helpful. Jody Berman.
Hi, Rabbi Yashul.
Oh, thank you, Candid. I appreciate
I
that, and I
just came
appreciate
on
you.
only to assure you you are not frozen. I see you
Yeah.
and hear you.
What about that?
Nope.
I think I have it. No,
You
I'm just
can't
kidding.
fool me.
I'm just messing with you.
Have fun.
With you.
Looking forward
Thank you. Okay. We're going to start off with a question that's not necessarily about the Ten Commandments, but it is about Torah itself. Here's the question. The question is this. How many books are in the Torah? How many books are in the Torah? How many books are in the Torah? If you have an answer, just throw it into the chat. Let's hear. We got 5. We got more than 5. Huh, interesting. Throw it into the chat. I want to see. Type it in. Okay, 5. Sukasa, 5. Love it. What else we got? Oh, 5 typed out, not just the number. Very impressive, Leslie. Thank you. Keep going. 5 from Susan Ehrlich. Look at this. Look at these 5 books. 5. Very educated Jews. Very educated Jews. However, I'm here to tell you that you are all absolutely wrong, incorrect. There are, in fact, 7. Huh? What? Yes.
What?
There are, in fact, yes. There are, in fact, 7 books. What? How is that possible? All right. Well, at least so says Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the compiler, the writer of the Mishnah in about 200, right? In about 200, where he says there are actually 7 books. And he gets that from a Torah portion that is coming up in a few weeks, which I'm very, very excited about because it's my Torah portion from my bar mitzvah. And it happens to fall on the date June 13th, 613. 613 commandments, 613, the date, coincidence? I don't think so. Yes, there are 7. Because in that book, right, in the book of Bamidbar, there is a section in my Torah portion, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, but I need to introduce it now so we can get to our kemach of the beautiful Torah shared by Rabbi Nanis. In the middle of my Torah portion, there are 2 inverted nuns, 2 inverted nuns, right? 2 inverted nuns. As these nuns kind of look, nuns are 2 Hebrew letters, as the Hebrew letter, nun, and they are inverted, and they kind of like a bookmark off a little section, very, very small section, just a few lines, right? But enough to be considered by the rabbis as an entire book, right? And it's just kind of sections off. It talks about laws, whatnot. It goes into something that seems to not really have anything to do with what's going on, and then goes back into a completely new section about the handling of laws and whatnot. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says that right there within a book is another hidden book, which actually turns Bamidbar into 3 books. So you have, right? So you have the first 3 books, then you have Bamidbar with the 3 books, then you have Deuteronomy at the end, number 7. It's this hidden book where he says within our 5 books, right? Within the teachings of the 5, there's hidden meaning, or as I like to say, hidden value, right? There's hidden value that with just a face value of looking at something for what it is in its face, that we don't see it, even though it is quote unquote hiding right in front of our faces. Now, why do I share this with you? And it has something to do with our the title of my quote unquote talk, because you guys are going to be doing a little bit of work, right? I'm actually putting you to work tonight. The title of my talk is my post-pandemic 10 commandments. My post-pandemic 10 commandments. Now, in listening to Rabbi Susan, to Rabbi Nanis, especially let's talk about when she was talking about the Besht, the Baal Shem Tov, when she's looking at the different levels of during situation that we are in right now in coronavirus, where in the beginning everybody is just, you know, freaking out. It's the end of the world. What's going? No. Let's everybody take a breath. Let's understand what's going on. Soften a little bit, right? But acknowledge that this is not. I don't want to say a new normal, because I don't like that. Saying the reality of accepting and working within the reality that is reality around us. And in doing so, understanding that there are ways for us to, as she was talking about, bring this idea of sweetness. And I'm going to take this idea of sweetness to recognizing, right? Even while accepting the situation, understanding the situation, working to change the situation, but understanding that there is still hidden value. She was talking about hidden meaning. That's a harder one for me to say hidden meaning like there's hidden meaning that we create, not hidden meaning like this was meant to be, right? Because I don't want to go there. I don't like that. I don't want to go there with this idea of meant to be. But I do like the way she, Rabbi Nanis was explaining hidden meaning that we create. But here's where we're going to go with it today. It's not enough for us to create the sweetness within or find the hidden meaning, find that hidden book of Torah, right? That is really right in front of our faces. It's what are we going to do with it once we find it, once we understand the role it plays or can play or should play in our life, and then how do we maintain it, right? As one of our fearless leaders at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple, my executive director, Donna Nadell, always says in our meetings, right, when we're being creative and we're coming up with ideas, she says, well, you know, I really hope, yes, these are great, and we're doing all these fabulous things. I hope they don't end up on the COVID cutting room floor, right? I hope they don't end up on the COVID cutting room floor, right? Susan, there, like, you are so right. I didn't even tell you the name of the Torah portion. It's Baha'alotcha. It's coming up on 6/13. I will be leading services that Saturday morning because it was my bar mitzvah portion. Don't worry, I won't be chanting it the same way that I did when I was 13, when I was sounded more like this. Fight a bear, I don't know. No, don't worry, I won't be doing that, but I will be talking about it. Anyway, right. We have to make sure that this sweetness or this gratitude that we are experiencing because of the pandemic and the situation that we're in, understanding that there is a lot of pain and there is a lot of suffering and we see it all around us, that we can still, for our own selves, like Rabbi Nanis was saying, with the hope that we don't let this sweetness and this gratitude and these changes that we are making in our lives end up on the COVID cutting room floor. For example, and this is kind of crazy to admit, I've shared this with some of the clergy and some of my friends. During this time, I'm walking around my neighborhood a lot more than I did before. Being respectful, social distancing, but actually meeting many of my neighbors. Right? I've lived in this house where I am now 10 years. There are people just down the street from me, and I'm embarrassed to say, who I didn't know them. Maybe I saw them, I didn't know their names. Maybe it was just when I was driving, or really just out in my house, or really just focusing on myself, not really understanding that, look, there are other people around here. But during this time, I've had the opportunity to walk around and I'm talking to people, meeting new people, right? There's a family that lives just right over here. I'm sitting in my dining room, and to my left, right, there's a street, and right across the street, there is a family that lives there. They have two little children, two beautiful little children. The daughter's name is Izzy. My daughter is Izzy. Their little boy is named Elon. My son is Eli. Check that out. And I've never talked to them. I've seen them. I've seen them playing outside. I saw the mother, when she was pregnant with the children, right? And then, give it, but I never talked to them until now. Why? I'm sure you've all heard this, you all say it with your friends, and I've said it with my friends, it takes a pandemic. It takes a pandemic to fill in the blank. It takes a pandemic for me to go through all these fabulous old pictures and go down memory lane. It takes a pandemic for me to break out my wedding video and watch it with my children. It takes a pandemic for me to meet some of my neighbors. It takes a pandemic for me to keep some granola bars in my car so I can give them out when I see somebody in need, right? It takes a pandemic, So I had an opportunity to speak with them across the street, right? Turns out we have multiple mutual friends in common. Right? The mother also works in the Jewish world. And the little boy asked, when this is all over, if he can come over my house for hot dogs on Shabbat. And I said, Elon, I will make you hot dogs for Shabbat, right? But what is my point? That during this time, I'm more open to meeting people who live around me and who may need my help, or who may just need someone to talk to. I'm more open to people. Another thing that we are doing, we are, as a family, trying to figure out what's the best way to keep volunteering, right? We're at the car center where we're not going right now, where we would go many times as a family. We are looking for other opportunities to help, where we are working with the synagogue in organizing families and making sandwiches together, and then making sure that those get delivered to the right place to then be distributed to those in need, right? Why does it take a pandemic for me to do those smaller things? Like, yes, we're going to the car center, but here's some other things that I can do as well. Even the simple things like Rabbi Nanis was talking about, of spending more time with my family, making that more of a priority, making sure I'm spending meals with them, right? Taking care of myself, more exercise, and feeling the benefits of that, and connecting with others in doing so, right? I would venture to say that all of us have experienced some kind of hidden value that we can take away from the reality of our situation. Again, I'm not going to call it the new normal, because it's not normal. It's not normal that I'm not allowed to hug people and give high fives. No, but I understand it's the reality right now. So what am I doing to change that, or to work within that, right? I'm in contact now with more friends across the country than I ever been. Even the ones who live down the street, spending more time with my friends via Zoom, making sure I take the opportunity to do so, which I didn't necessarily before. So here's what we are going to do. We have an assignment. You thought you were just going to be learning something and listening. No, you have work to do, people. We are going to be writing our very own, post-pandemic 10 commandments. Or in other words, things that we are doing now that are new for us, that have kind of come up because of the situation we're in. For me, for speaking, walking around and meeting my neighbors more, speaking to people, spending more time with my family, exercising more, right? Doing those things, to name 3, right? Or perhaps it's things that maybe we want to start doing, right? More opportunity, look for more opportunities to volunteer, look for more opportunities to engage Jewishly, right? With tefillah. I know it's unprecedented across the country. More people are engaging Jewishly than for years prior because of the situation we're in, and we're searching for these connections and opportunities, right? What are those things that you either want to keep doing or would like to start doing as soon as possible? And how, here's the question, how are you going to maintain them? Let's say, God willing, in a year from now, hopefully we have moved past this towards the life, a different life that we recognize, right? But that we don't leave these beautiful new developments, values on the COVID cutting room floor. So you have a job. You're going to make a list. You are going to think now. You are going to think. You are going to think of these different things, right? Things about things. You're going to make your list. Here's what we're going to do in a moment. I'm going to give you a moment to, if you need, to go get a piece of paper and a pencil, and an opportunity for you to sit with yourself and start writing these things down. Or you could be typing them. You can type them in an email on your computer or whatnot. And while we're thinking and while we're talking, or while you're thinking and while you're writing, I also want to open it up, right, to any of you, if you want to share one of the sweetnesses that Rabbi Nanis was talking about, one of the new things that you're thankful for, or one of the things that you're going to put on your 10 commandment list that you want to make sure doesn't fall to the COVID cutting room floor, right? So while everybody is writing, if you would like to share an experience or share something, please virtually raise your hand. And Jessica Reisenberg, one of our fearless producers, will call on you, unmute you, and I would like for you to share what you are thinking about. Okay, so here's the thing. Before we do that, how are you going to hold yourself accountable? Well, we're going to do that together. I'm going to give you 2 options, okay? And I'm making a pledge to you. Well, you'll see what I mean in a second. You'll see my pledge in a second. You are either going to do one of 2 things. You are either going to, I'm going to share something with you. You are either going to, hold on. Here we go. You are either going to email them. You are either going to email them to me, right? You are either going to email them to me, or you're going to write them down on a piece of paper, and you're going to hide them in your house somewhere, and you're going to email me where you hid it. Okay, so you're either going to email me your actual list of your 10 post-pandemic 10 commandments, right? I promise I will not read it. That's my pledge to you, that I will not read it. This is just strictly for you. Or if you feel more comfortable, you're going to write it down on a piece of paper, and you are going to hide it somewhere in there in your house, and you're going to email me where you hid it. Okay, you're going to email me where you hid it. So again, you have 2 options. You can either email me the list in the body of the email, your top 10 post-pandemic 10 commandments, right? Your post-pandemic 10 commandments. the things that you want to make sure don't fall to the COVID cutting room floor, right? Keeping the sweetnesses. I will not read it. Or you write it down on a separate piece of paper, you hide it somewhere in your house, and you email me where you hid it. I am going to keep your email in a special folder, right, on my computer, and I will reply to you, to your original email in a year. I'm putting it in my calendar right now, that a year from today, right, a year from now, for next Shavuot, I'm going to email you your list. And this way it's an opportunity for you to check in with yourself. Are you following your very own post-pandemic 10 commandments, right? This is the kemach to Rabbi Nanis's Torah. Without us actually doing it, it's Torah Shalmala. But we need that Torah Shalmala, that upper Torah, those beautiful ideas to help inspire us to do the work on the ground, the kemach, okay? All right, so now, there's my email over there too. Thank you, right here. Rabbi David at WBTLA.org. Rabbi David at WBTLA.org. Put in the subject, my post-pandemic 10 commandments. The body of the message, write down where you hid your list, or type your post-pandemic 10 commandments in the body of the email. Send it to me, I will not read it. I'm gonna send it back to you in a year. Okay, now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna stop sharing this, coming back to the crew. Now, Jessica, you may call on people if anybody would like to share, or if anyone has any questions. Jessica, if you want, if you would like to, you can rate all of our attendees or our panelists if you want. You raise your hand, Jessica will unmute you. You can ask your question, or you can share a story, one of your sweetnesses, the hidden sweetness in our current situation. So there we go. I'll give you a second to think about it. Oh, we got some. Susan Ehrlich's raising her hand. Go ahead, Susan.
Unmute? Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are unmuted.
I think
Long-time listener, first-time caller. I love it. Let's hear it, Susan.
I think there's so many sweetnesses, silver linings in this. One is I'm not driving, and two, Bill is not facing traffic where he used to get so upset and angry.
And you sit in services like this.
Yeah, that's right. And that's traffic.
So what he's thinking about is the traffic. I hate traffic. Thank you for Shabbat.
That was the traffic. So my husband is calmer and not upset.
Beautiful.
Thank goodness for Zoom. I don't even have to have a 10 commandments for what I won't do, because I'm going to continue with this. I'm taking classes at American Jewish University.
Write it down.
Torah study with Rabbi Nicole at Sinai. And then Talmud Tales with Rabbi Nickerson.
I love it.
Today, Torah study with Rabbi Nanis. And I mean, and I'm speaking to people around the country. I'm calling people more and talking to them while I'm walking. So I'm exercising more. There's very little not to like, except, hugging my daughter. I should say that, that's it. But there's less smog, there's less congestion, people are nicer to one another. And I think there are silver linings in this.
So write it down. I want you to write those things down, the specific things that you can keep doing or that you want to do. Write it down, write it down, write it down. Because I'm going to check in on you. Okay? Write it down. I love it. Thank you for sharing, Susan. Oh my goodness, who we got over here? Look at all these fabulous people. Jessica, I'm going to let you call on our next long-time listener, first-time callers.
Wait, I'm talking?
No, you call on somebody.
All right, it's Mitch Dorf.
Yeah, Mitch Dorf. Bring it, Mitch. Speak.
Hi.
Hi, Mitch.
Quality time being spent with the family.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We haven't killed each other yet.
God forbid, not that beautiful family.
You know, but although Sadie's not living with us, she's on her own.
Yeah.
But Max, unfortunately, was not able to participate in his semester abroad in Europe and came home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he came home in March and has been with us ever since. And it's been kind of interesting to have interesting conversations as the pandemic has brought up topics that we never really considered before. Politically, socially, religiously, and whether it's, you know, being creative to make a meal together or how to spend the day, whether it's a project of refinishing the deck or doing something to occupy the time while we, you know, are unemployed and waiting this out to see where it goes, or trying to figure things out and to get our bases basically covered so that we can feel comfortable as we go on to the next stage.
Amazing, Mitch. Write it down, man. Write it down and send it to me. Write it down and send it to me, please. And make sure, give a hug to that beautiful boy from me. And tell him Boker Tov.
He was talking when you were on, he was talking about you a lot, about the time you spent working with you.
Oh,
and not
man,
for
so
you.
good. No, that's right, man. That
And
is
he said how he got a unique perspective to Rabbi David that most kids never got. And you know exactly what he's talking about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mitch. Let's move on. I appreciate it, Mitch. I appreciate you. Last one, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. Last one. Jeff. Let's see. Jeff, I'm allowing you to talk. You are now permitted to speak.
Hello, Rabbi. Thank you. You know, the essence of Shabbat is what you've been describing, and others have as well.
Beautiful.
Reestablishing family contact, reestablishing communication.
Beautiful.
This COVID-19 period of quarantine should be considered Shabbat every day, giving you the opportunity to experience the essence of Shabbat in your life.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so write it down, write it down and send it to me. I love that. I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay, here's what we have to end on this. We have to just end. This is the one right here. Courtney, I need Courtney to be unmuted because my good friend Sawyer would like to read the one she just wrote. I need it. Courtney, you're muted, but you are permitted to speak. I love that. I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay, here's what we have to end on this. This is the one. Right. Go ahead, Courtney. I want to hear it. I need Courtney to be unmuted because I can hear. We can hear you listening to me in real time. Sawyer.
Hi, can you
let
hear
me hear
us?
it. Yes. Say it, Sawyer. Bring it. Bring us home.
Okay, sorry. Bring it home.
My pandemic 10 commandments. 1, stay safe. 2, keep on learning. 3, social distance. 4, celebrate. 5, have fun. 6, stay active. 7, try new things. 8, get out. 9, do things you haven't done. And 10, help others.
Beautiful. I love it. Sawyer, right, that you wrote those down. Send them to me because I'm going to send them back to you in a year. Unfortunately, we are now out of time. Thank you so much. I look forward to receiving your emails. Don't worry, I'm not going to read them, but I'm going to put them in a folder and send them back to you in a year. Back to you, Jessica. I don't know. I don't remember who's up next. Oh, I think it's Lisa, Cantor Lisa. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to ask my guests to unveil themselves.
Hi, everyone.
It's a party. We're all joining. And if you haven't already grabbed your cocktail to celebrate Shavuot with an exploration of Jewish music, I encourage you to go to the kitchen and grab your favorite cocktail of choice.
L'chaim.
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 We're waiting on one more. But welcome, everyone, and welcome to this amazing panel that we have for this evening. Tonight, we continue our celebration of Shavuot by celebrating Jewish music. Now, you might be wondering what music has to do with Shavuot, other than all the lovely and catchy songs that we have about Torah, or the beautiful Shavuot service with melody that we had with Cantor Gurney earlier this evening. But I'm going to give you a little bit of Torah before we get into our music. In Exodus 20, at the base of Mount Sinai, as the Israelites were about to receive the Ten Commandments, the text says, "As Moses spoke, God answered." But it doesn't say God answered him, Moses, but it specifically said God answered to all of us. It's in the plural, Ya'anenu bekol, in a voice. Now, the rabbis of our tradition interpret this use of the plural, that each infant, man, woman, and child heard the voice of God as they understood it. It's a personal understanding of God. So part of the journey of Shavuot is for each of us to look at our life and see where it is that we are hearing that divine presence, where it is that we feel that presence of God. And for me and this amazing panel, we hear God through music. In the sounds of voices coming together in song as one, we hear and experience a divine presence. Be it secular music or Jewish music, this divine language is much of what makes up my own identity, not just as a cantor who has studied the art of synagogue, music, and liturgy, but most importantly, my identity as a Jew. Now, we know that music has been part of Jewish life since biblical times. At the moment of Israel's birth as a nation, the exodus from Egypt, the Bible tells us that Miriam led the people of Israel in a song of divine praise. We have evidence that music was a huge part of the sacrificial worship service in the ancient temple, and as we know later became part of synagogue prayer services and at-home religious observance. So in honor of that, I've gathered some fantastic friends and colleagues who represent a small sampling of contemporary Jewish music today, who are following in the footsteps of our ancestors by blending Jewish tradition, liturgy, and culture with their own lived experiences in the year 2020. So I want to introduce my first guest, Professor Lori Black, who is the Associate Director of the Lowell Milken Fund for American Jewish Music at UCLA. He's a percussionist, pedagogue, and Jewish music specialist. And a little side note, Lori and I went to music school together. We had our first theory class together at UCLA, go Bruins.
Oh yeah.
And so it's so nice to be able to have him on tonight and to share his wisdom and his knowledge. So Lori, you are our resident academic of the group. So can you give me kind of, in your words or the scholarly world's definition of what is Jewish music?
Well, I think for me, what makes Jewish music so beautiful and so wonderful and exciting is that no one can give a real definition. So let me start with this. Jewish music is the song of Judaism through the lips of the Jew. It is the tonal expression of Jewish life and development over a period of more than 2,000 years. So that was Abraham Edelson, one of the first individuals to really study Jewish music as a monolith and as an academic study. And what we know, and while it was his work was groundbreaking in a book called Jewish Music and Its Historical Development, as we've learned that Jewish music is not a monolith. Jewish music is as diverse as the Jewish people, and the fact that we come from a diasporic culture is what allows Jewish music to expand and grow and be reborn over and over again. What I find most exciting is how Jews in general, we as a people, we have often lived on the peripheries of society in one way or another. But it's at those peripheries, at the borders of communities, that innovation really happens. Because at the border of communities, that's where communities intersect. And so one thing I can tell you is that our guests tonight are just such wonderful examples of the range of Jewish music. That Jewish music can be music of services and liturgy. Jewish music can be hip hop. Jewish music can be new Persian and Hebrew compositions. Jewish music is what we decide to make of it. I think that's probably what makes it so exciting. So with that, I don't want to take any more time. I know that we're tight. So should we jump to our next guests?
Let's do it. So we want to jump right in with the performances because this segment is so short. So I want to introduce first my friend and colleague, Josh Goldberg. Josh Goldberg is a Los Angeles-based singer, songwriter, producer, and soon-to-be ordained cantor. He is currently attending my alma mater, the Academy for Jewish Religion of California. In Josh's current album, Anchors in Balloon, he reflects on the balance between the sacred and secular, and he sings in both Hebrew as well as English. He's been a featured performer and presenter at many Jewish music conferences, the URJ Biennial, Limud UK in London, BBYO, Song Leader Bootcamp, and so many more. So Josh, if you just want to maybe say a few words about the music that you write and what it is that you're inspired by, and then we'll all be transfixed by your beautiful voice.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Dr. Lori Black and all of you for having us. This is, I think, a very apt way to celebrate Shavuot, because, you know, for me as a Jew and as a composer and songwriter and soon-to-be cantor, music sort of is the way I receive and the way I transmit Torah, you know, on this night when we as the Jews are receiving Torah. So, you know, my goal in songwriting and really in life is just to elevate Jewish spirituality and identity and connection and community through music. And as I'll show you in this piece tonight, this piece I'll share tonight is called Shema Kolenu. So it is based on High Holiday liturgy. And often in my compositions, I will combine English and Hebrew because I know in the diaspora, especially in, you know, Reform Jewish America, the vast majority of people don't speak Hebrew. And so a lot of times they hear these prayers and they sound really beautiful, and there is a universality in music that can reach anyone regardless of language. But I do take into consideration that it's easier to understand when you speak the language. So I do try to combine the Hebrew with English, either a translation or in this case, more of a reinterpretation of the meaning of the text. So this is a Shema Kolenu, and co-written with Shira Fox, who's another wonderful Jewish cantor and musician in Los Angeles. And I'm actually pleased that I found out this will be on the Transcontinental Music High Holiday Anthology coming up. So you'll get to see it in print form, and it'll be, you know, distributed. So if you're looking for high holiday music, it'll be out there. So I'm going to switch to my piano cam. You guys still hear me? So this is Shema Kolenu. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. All right. Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel berachamim, uvratzon et tfilateinu. Won't you hear our voice above all the noise, and have mercy on our souls? Won't you hear our prayer? We are in your care. Forgive us, forgive us. Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel berachamim, uvratzon et tfilateinu. When we've lost our way, give us one more day to return to what is true. Won't you take us in so we can begin a new year. Won't you please hear? Shema Koleinu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel berachamim, uvratzon et tfilateinu, uvratzon et tfilateinu, uvratzon et tfilateinu.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, that was
Incredible.
fantastic.
Such a beautiful piece, such an incredible piece, and just the blending of tradition and the blending of the sounds that we hear of contemporary music and ballads. It's so perfect and fully expresses a more modern approach to such incredible liturgy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm looking at
Please.
our time. So one thing that really excites me about your music is how you are trying to inject your almost like a midrash into the actual recitation of this prayer. And I'm wondering, when you built this melody and you kind of started to bring that drash in, like, how did that come together? How did you put those together?
Well, I mean, often for me, it just starts with opening up the Siddur and thinking, what do I want to write today? And for some reason that day I opened up to Shema Koleinu, and usually I'll start with the Hebrew and just see where that takes me. We learn about there's different types of prayers. We have prayers of request, we have prayers of praise, we have prayers of thanks. And obviously for Shema Koleinu, it's an urgent prayer of request. And so I wanted to think, what does it sound like to have something we're really asking to be heard? And so I started with the music, and then Shira Fox helped me kind of flesh out the lyrics.
Well, it's really beautiful, and Mazel Tov on the publication.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Josh. So our next guest is a beautiful singer, songwriter, musician extraordinaire, Miss Chloe Pomerati, who I have had the pleasure of knowing for I think the last 5 or 6 years. And Chloe is a Persian-American composer, multi-instrumentalist, singer, and educator, best known for the breadth of her musical style. She recently was a winner of both the Global Music Awards and Independent Music Awards for her debut album, Begin Majesty. And the music that she writes is innovative and imaginative and so deeply influenced by our tradition and by her Persian ancestry, but is also so current for today's world. So welcome, Chloe. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to also be in Walt Disney Hall with you, partially.
Figured I'd be fancy.
I love it. It's beautiful. So what I wanted to do and to share today in the spirit of Shavuot is, this holiday is really about receiving, right? And this whole month is about the art of receiving. That's the quality of this month of Sivan, is mastering the art of receiving in a way. And so for us to be able to receive, first there has to be this openness, right? This openness in ourselves to be able to receive. So I think it's so perfect that we're beginning the night, the beginning of Shavuot with music, because music really has the strongest power, the strongest ability to open our spirits and prepare us for the evening and prepare us for this month of Sivan also. So what I want to share with you is a simple medley of a few songs that I've written, and they're all all the same chord progression. So I'm just gonna go from one to the other. And let me know if you hear me, okay? Ilu finu male shirakaya. Ilu finu male shirakaya. Shira kaya male shirakaya. Shira kaya male shirakaya. Ilu finu male shirakaya. Ilu finu male shirakaya. Shira kaya male shirakaya. Shira kaya male shirakaya. If our mouths were full of song, as the sea is full of water, these beautiful words, Yidu finu male shirakaya. Now we continue the beautiful morning prayer, which expresses gratitude for the purity of our souls. Elohai Neshama. Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi, Shenatata bi, Teorai. Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi, Shenatata bi, Teorai. Elohai Neshama, Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi, Natata bi, Shenatata bi, Teorai. Shenatata bi, Teorai. Tu pravdata, danamat pura, hum tare bekari jiyo, hum tare bekari jiyo. Ve'ahavta, ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך, ואהבת בכל מאודך, שנתת בי דאוהי. Shenatata bi deohai, Shenatata bi deohai, Shenatata bi
Wow.
We're doing the Zoom clap.
Yeah, the Zoom
Chloe,
clap.
that was so beautiful.
You're-
You literally, your voice and your spirit, it is Torah. You cut so deep into our souls and just rip open our hearts just to be ready to accept that Torah at Mount Sinai and that Torah to our hearts. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Every time I hear that one, I feel like it's the only Elohai Neshama that'll get me dancing.
I feel like it was taking Dr. Black everything in his power to not get a drum and start drumming along.
How do you know I wasn't? Chloe, if I can just pry for a second, one of the things that it just so excites me about your music is, and you can tell me I'm totally wrong, but it's this fusion of your heritage and background with just pure spirituality, just like real neshama. And I would, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and how that comes together, how that happens, I'd love to hear more.
It's amazing. You know, my background is a combination of so many things. You know, I was born in the US, first generation American. My parents are Iranian immigrants, so I grew up in a house, in my house speaking Farsi, outside of the house speaking English, going to Jewish day school, so learning Hebrew at the same time that I was learning English. Studying classical music in college, classical violin right there. And then later in life, studying Persian music with that instrument right there, kamanche. And always really being on a very spiritual journey amid all of that too. Like Jewish upbringing, but then in high school, being completely not interested in it. In college, not very interested in it. Long time yogi, studied Buddhism, Hinduism, sang with the Hare Krishnas in Union Square in New York City, like all of this stuff. Like I've really, I've always been seeking and always been interested in so many different modes of spirituality. And then later in life, I found that everything I was searching for, everything everywhere else, exists in Judaism. It's right in front of me. And so I started feeling more inspired to use Hebrew in music. And I in my own prayer, it really came out of my own experience of prayer. When I pray and I look at the words and say, oh, these words are beautiful. They deserve a melody to elevate them even more, And that's just how it happened. That's the story of it all,
Thank you
There's
so
really
much.
There's no, I don't believe in boundaries in music, as I don't believe that they're in boundaries in ourselves, or that there's any boundary or limitation in our perception of God or life or anything like that. So, may we continue, living without boundaries and limitations, and see what more beauty that creates,
Amen.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so fitting, because the Jews and Jewish music and even the way that we practice our religion has never really lived within boundaries. We've always borrowed, in whatever land that we were in, we took in the sounds, and we took in some of the practices, and we took in some of the stories, and we've really been able to adapt. And that's part of the reason why we've been able to survive as a people for so long, is that we've always been willing to change and adapt with what's around us. So thank you so much for sharing.
And we continue to.
And we continue to. May we continue to. Our last performer for the evening, so we're watching the clock, his name is Josh Dolgan, also known as So Called, and he is a pianist, accordionist, producer, journalist, photographer, filmmaker. The list continues on, based in Montreal, Quebec. He's lectured and has led masterclasses in music festivals all around the world, and is known for his eclectic mix of hip-hop, klezmer, yes, I said klezmer and hip hop in the same sentence, and other styles such as drum, bass, and folk music. And I first met Josh for the first time at a Milk and Archive think tank about what is Jewish music and how do we move forward in the Jewish world. And I was just completely blown away by his talent and his innovation of taking what you'll see of our cultural past, our musical cultural past, and bringing it new, fresh eyes. So Josh, welcome so much. We're so glad that you could join us. I know it's a little late in Montreal.
It's all right. It's perfect. Thanks for having me. What an honor to be amongst such cool artists and presenters and stuff on this beautiful night. You see me all right? You hear my voice and stuff? Perfect. So, I mean, my story is a little different. I am really not religious at all. I was the only Jewish kid in this little town in Quebec growing up, and I went to synagogue, and I never got into it. And it was only through collecting old records that I started to find Jewish music, and not synagogue music, but secular Jewish music, Yiddish theater music, Yiddish folk song, art song. And then, of course, Hasidic music, and then cantorial music, synagogue music. And I got into it because I was collecting old records, and then I found myself. I found my own cultural identity. I found my past. I found something that I could sort of sink my teeth into that came from my history, and it gave me a voice in music. And so I've been making music. And this song I'm going to sing for you, well, I'm going to smush together two songs. One is kind of something like a traditional, a song from Moldova. So from a lot of the Ashkenazi Jews that are in America, their roots come from Eastern Europe and come from and contain music of Moldova, Romania, Ukraine, Russia. So this song is a doina, it's a shepherd's lament from the repertoire of Arkady Gendler, who is a great singer who lived in my grandfather's hometown of Zaporozhye in Ukraine. So I will do that, and then I'll do something a little bit more modern, just so you see what's going on, what the kind of hip hop mix. You get a taste, but I think we're running low on time, so here we go.
Alle haben nicht gerissen, noch ein Lied ist mir verblieben, sie kann mich nicht vergessen. Noch ein Lied ist mir verblieben, sie kann mich nicht vergessen. Oh, mein liebe Bessarabia, Land von Frieden, Land von Treue. Wenn ich der Mann sich in deinen Zeiten noch ich wein und ich bedeue. Spielt ein Peister auf sein Pfeifel. Bin ich der Mann, dich in deiner Lonkes, in mein Herz noch sie bänken.
All right. Yeah. From Yiddish theater. Here we go. Ich bin schon wieder Single. Kommt so wie ein Jingle. Mit meinem Weibel hab ich sich gegeben. Gedenkt hab ich zu rufen, herumgesucht zu schlüpfen, hat mein Weibel mehrere Bergerät. Jo, was darfst du suchen, Wicken? In Fremde rum sich stecken, und sei alleine retten zu die Welt. Er zeigte bitten, go bei ihr, ist mir gut Corona, schiere Rest und trinkt noch Hüllig, Brenner Welt, Brenner Welt. All right. Young man, ich bin a border by mein Vibe. Yeah, come on. All right, would you sing along with me? Everybody in LA, come on. Everybody. Sing it like you mean it. Come on, come on. I can't hear you. Oh, just a second. Oh, sorry about that. All right, yeah. Es ist ein Fall genieten, alles kann ich kriegen, wie ein fremder Worte bei mein Vibe. Ich darf mein Vibe hitten, in ankommen in mitten, wenn der Butcher bringt das Fleisch herein. Jo, ich bin ganz frei von Sorgen, nicht arbeiten und bringen ihr das Geld. Dann zeigt die Picken, wo bei ihr ist wie gut Corona, Schere, Ressen, trinkt noch und ich brenn am Welt.
Young man, single and free.
Ich bin a border by mein Vibe. All right.
Wow.
That was
Goldberg.
amazing.
That was so good. That was incredible.
Thank you,
That
my
was
friends.
Amazing. That was
Happy
incredible.
Shavuos.
A freilich niggin.
Amazing.
Cool.
Chag Shavuot Sameach, everyone. I hope this gave you just a little bit of taste of contemporary Jewish music and how much our cultural identity, our religious identity, our tradition, and our past really plays into the Jewish music that we create. In one night, we heard Yiddish being rapped, we heard synagogue music, and we heard Persian melody influenced world music with Jewish liturgy. It is just an amalgamation of all of the different traditions and cultures of our people. And I just encourage you to keep exploring this world of Jewish music. So thank you to my guests. Thank you to Josh
Cantor Lisa.
and
Thank you,
Josh
Cantor
and
Lisa.
Chloe
Thank you, Cantor
and Lori.
Peacock.
Cantor
Thank you for
Lisa.
putting this together.
Cantor
Lisa. Cantor.
L'chaim, everyone.
L'chaim,
L'chaim,
everybody.
Rabbi
Get
Shapiro.
Yantiv. Chag Sameach.
Okay, so we're gonna get out of
Cantor
here.
Peacock.
But Rabbi Shapiro, I am handing the proverbial Zoom mic off to you.
That was amazing. I should know better than to follow Cantor Peacock in life, much less on Erev Shavuot. But that was just a wonderful way to kind of ease into, I think, the second act of the evening tonight. I think we're entering the 9 o'clock hour, which I think means it's, I don't know about in your house, in my house, that means it's officially getting to be a little bit later and starting to feel a little bit like we really are staying up here all night studying in celebration of Shavuot. So one of the things that I've found to be the most meaningful and fulfilling that I've done as a rabbi in the past few years has been to imagine, create, and spend a lot of time teaching folks who are looking to convert to Judaism, folks who are looking to officially join the family of the Jewish people. And one of the reasons that it's been so enriching and so fulfilling and meaningful to me is because it has enabled me to see Judaism through their eyes, to see Judaism with fresh eyes, as someone who comes with a blank slate encounters it. And so in the brief amount of time we have tonight, I thought that I would share with you a few of the concepts and a few of the ideas that those who are coming to Judaism from other traditions are simply astounded by. And they, in many cases, are things that most of us take for granted, or at the very least, give relatively or very little thought to. So we'll get started with number one. Number one is God. Every Jew's absolutely least favorite topic to talk about, God. If I had $1 for every single person who said to me, well, Rabbi, you know, I love being Jewish and it's very deep in my heart, but I'm a cultural Jew, or I'm a secular Jew. If I had $1 for every person that said that to me, I'd be long since retired on a golf course somewhere. But when you think about that statement, it's something that could really only be said about Judaism. Think about it for a minute. How many secular Catholics or cultural Episcopalians have you ever met? Non-Jews don't really get it. They don't understand how someone could even be or define or think of themselves as being a secular or a cultural Jew. After all, it's a religion, it has a theology, it has a belief. So how can you be a secular member of a religion? And the answer, I think, is something relatively simple, which is this idea
that God, that theology itself is actually not a defining point for Jews. God and theology is really not what distinguishes us from other Jewish movements or traditions. Right? God theology is actually not what makes us as Reformed Jews different from our conservative brothers and sisters, or even different than our Orthodox brothers and sisters. Those differences are about the way we view Jewish law in large part, but not really about differences in our theologies, because we can find a wide variety of different theologies in a Reformed community. We can find a wide variety of different theologies in the conservative community, and we can find a wide variety of different theologies in the most traditional Orthodox communities. There's an old joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Well, that's true about a lot of things. And it's also true about God. It's also true about theology. So this idea that there isn't a single Jewish theology, there's not a single theological dogma, to use the really academic phrase, in our tradition, is a radical idea when we think about it, right? That there's not one way to believe or think about God, right? Other than perhaps monotheism, right? Think about the Shema, this cornerstone of our tradition, right? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen or hear, people of Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. This statement of monotheism. But that's where it ends, right? It doesn't follow up by dictating to us what we must believe about that one God. So this idea, right? This idea that if you said to me, Rabbi, explain to me what is the Jewish theology? I really don't have an answer. I really don't have an answer. My answer is that, well, there are a multitude of Jewish theologies, very diverse, in some cases in conflict with one another, but all Jewish. And so again, for folks who are coming to Judaism with fresh eyes, this idea that Judaism is in essence a religion that doesn't tell people what they have to believe is completely earth-shattering and mind-blowing. And again, something that many of us, most of us even, just sort of take for granted as a part of this tradition that we love so much. Which leads us to number 2. Number 2 is this welcoming and embrace of questioning and wrestling. This embrace of being uncertain that is perhaps unique to Judaism as well. Many religious traditions embrace the idea of certainty and answers, whereas Judaism is almost the opposite. It embraces the idea of uncertainty and embraces questions. Always more questions than answers, not always satisfying for us as Jews, but always makes for a rich and deep and meaningful conversation, to say the very least, right? We question what we believe, and we wrestle with what God is, and we wrestle with what God is not, and that wrestling and that struggle and that questioning, that uncertainty is baked into the DNA of the Jewish people. Sometimes people will say to me, well, Rabbi, I'm not sure I believe in this, or I'm not sure if it really happened the way it says it did in the Torah, or I have questions about this, and that makes me a bad Jew. And my response is always almost the same, which is that, on the contrary, being uncertain, questioning, wrestling with what we believe and don't believe doesn't make someone a bad Jew. On the contrary, I think it makes someone a great Jew, because that struggle, that wrestling is really at the core of who we are and what we are as Jews. And it is that same struggle and that same questioning that in many other Western religious traditions, maybe even most other Western religious traditions, is considered heresy, right? It's simply not allowed. If you ask too many questions, that's, it's about acceptance of
of a certain truth, of the truth. Many of you know my wife Ashley, who grew up here in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. She attended a Catholic high school. She went to Chaminade, which at the time, the joke I think is that they called it Shalomanad because about a quarter of the students there were Jewish. But she proudly was the recipient, the winner of the Religious Studies Award every year for 4 years in high school at her Catholic high school, which to this day she actually attributes to being Jewish, because she was the one in class who constantly kept asking questions, kept wondering why she was being taught what she was being taught. And, you know, many of her classmates who didn't come from kind of this questioning Jewish background just sort of said, fine, yeah, and took what they were being taught at face value. And she kept digging deeper and kept wrestling with it and questioning. And that was taken to be this deep intellectual curiosity. And she said, it's only because I'm a Jew that we don't know how to not question, right? So it's really baked into our DNA, but, you know, unique to Judaism in many ways. There's this famous story in the Torah that Jacob goes to sleep and he has a dream, and in his dream he wrestles with an angel, he wrestles with God, he wakes up and he receives a new name. His name changes from Jacob to Israel, and we are then known as the people Israel, as Jacob's descendants. And that name Israel literally means one who wrestles with God, right? Jacob's given that name after this vignette of wrestling. But again, it's another way to underscore this idea that grappling with theology, with what we do believe, what we don't believe, that is who we are. That is what it means to be the children of Israel, the children, those who wrestle with God, right? And again, that's in contrast to many other traditions in which a specific theology is presented, no questioning, no wrestling, sort of take it or leave it. And, you know, many of you may have heard me tell this story. A good friend of mine, his name is Ryan Bell, just elected to public office in the San Gabriel Valley. And Ryan, when I met him, Ryan used to be a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, minister. Seventh-day Adventist, pretty conservative, relatively small sect of Christianity. And Ryan grew up in that world, very, very smart guy. I met him community organizing for affordable housing and homeless rights, socially very liberal. And a few years ago, he started to wonder if maybe there was, you know, more than simply the relatively narrow theology and theological framework that he had grown up with, that he had studied in school, that he'd studied in seminary, that he'd preached for the better part of his adult life, that maybe there was more to it than that. Maybe there was another way to think about the world, maybe another way to think about God. Nothing radical, right? Just wanted to have an intellectual conversation with himself about this. And that led pretty quickly to him losing his job at the church. He was on the faculty of a few theological seminaries in town, lost those jobs. His wife left him, all because he wanted to have this conversation with himself. We ended up having breakfast sort of near the beginning of this journey for him, a journey that he called A Year Without God. And he's explaining to me what he's going through and what he's thinking. And I looked at him and I said, Ryan, it's so Jewish. And he laughed, knowing enough about Judaism to understand what I meant. I said, you know, I feel so bad for you. My heart breaks for you that here you have to leave the entire world and community that you've known your entire life in order to have this intellectual conversation about God and about theology and about what you believe about the world. I said, and it's like Tuesday for a Jew, right? You have to leave the whole world that you're a part of. And for us as Jews, like, we don't even think twice about it. It's the conversation I have in my office 4 times a week with people, right? So this idea of questioning and wrestling, so special for us to have as Jews. And again, really the second thing that the people that come to Judaism are just astounded by. The third is this idea that Jewish belief is maybe not the most important thing. Here's what I mean by that. Frequently, I get a call from a high school student who's working on a comparative religion paper, has to, come and learn a little bit about Judaism. And they come and they meet with me, and they usually, the first question they ask is, tell us what Jews believe. What do Jews believe, Rabbi? And I'm never quite sure how to answer the question. I'm never quite sure how to answer the question because Judaism is a tradition that is far more concerned with behavior than with belief. Far more concerned with behavior than belief, far more concerned with what we do, with how we live our lives, than by what we think or say, right? Historically, the church's critique of Judaism was that it was about deed, not creed, or deed over creed, right? And Rabbi Leder's fond of saying, I think he's joined us now, Rabbi Leder's fond of saying that he agrees with that statement, he just doesn't think it's a critique. And so Rabbi Leder can agree with that statement, and I can agree with Rabbi Leder, right? That it's not a critique, right? That actions really do speak louder than words. That all the belief, all the faith is all well and good, but if that faith and that belief doesn't actually lead to action, it doesn't get us very far, right? We can believe that it's unjust that there are people who are hungry in the world, but if that belief doesn't lead us to actually do something about that, to roll up our sleeves and to feed someone, so what? Likewise, for what it's worth, we could believe that, folks who are hungry deserve to be hungry, and it's their fault that they're hungry. But if we show up and do something anyway, if we act in a way that actually feeds them and does something to address that malady, then our belief is really irrelevant because the person is still getting fed. And so again, in this spirit, in this theme of not having a single way to think about things, not having one monolithic way to think about things, is refreshing and so surprising to so many folks who come to Judaism from traditions that in many ways present a certain viewpoint and a certain way to believe or to think about things. And so when folks are told that we're not going to tell them what they have to think, we're not going to tell them what they have to believe, we're going to tell them how they should behave, we're going to tell them what kind of people they should be. But that speaks, I think, to the ration, that speaks to the inter-ethical and moral imperatives that so many of us treasure, and that really, really is attractive about our tradition to so many. Number four. Rabbis are not holier than anybody else. Rabbis are not holier than anybody else. The word rabbi literally just means teacher. And so the rabbi, despite what some people might think, doesn't pray for you, doesn't pray for anyone. I don't think most of us come to temple to have, any of the clergy pray for them. And the rabbi is not closer to God than anybody else. Rabbis, cantors are not intermediaries between Jews and God the way that clergy in many other religious traditions are, right? As much as I would like to, sometimes there's no red phone on the desk in my office that, gets answered any better than anybody else's calls, anybody else's prayers. In many ways, the rabbi is just the person in the community who went to graduate school, and learned more about Judaism than other people did. Just like the doctor goes to medical school, learns more about medicine, the lawyer goes to law school, learns more about law. So when I have a tax question, I call my accountant, And when she has a Jewish question, she calls me, right? And that is fundamentally different. That's fundamentally different than the priest who is closer to God than you are. The bishop is closer to God than the priest, the cardinal than the bishop, the pope. And that priest, that bishop, that cardinal prays for you, right? His prayers have an efficacy that an ordinary person's may not. He gives you absolution. You need that clergy person in order for you to do and engage in your religious duty, in your religious life. And if there's no priest, there's no mass. Now, please don't repeat to anyone, even though it's being recorded, what I'm about to say, because I really, really love my job. But the truth is, you don't really need a rabbi for most things in Judaism. You don't need a rabbi to pray. You don't need a rabbi for a bris. You need a moil, but you don't need a rabbi. You don't need a rabbi for a bar bat mitzvah. You don't need a rabbi for a wedding, actually. Any Jew can, based on Jewish law, marry two other Jews. You don't need a rabbi to officiate at a funeral. You don't need a rabbi for a Jewish prayer service. The only thing you really need for a Jewish prayer service is a minyan, is 10 other people, which leads me to the fifth thing that I think that so many folks really, really are amazed by when they encounter Judaism, which is this idea of community. The idea that in our tradition, the community is what is sacred. The community is, in a way, what is sovereign. This idea that gathering 10 people together, there's something holy and sacred and special and magical in that experience. That when we gather 10 people together, that something about that group conjures up the presence of God and brings God into that gathering, into that space. And I think in so many ways, that's what makes this quarantine and what makes all of this social distancing particularly challenging. Because on the one hand, it's antithetical to the very nature of Judaism, antithetical to the communal structure of Judaism, of being together, of celebrating together, of celebrating festivals together, of celebrating simchas, of joyful occasions, bar mitzvahs, brises, weddings together, mourning together in the sad times. But at the same time, I also think Judaism was made for this, was built for these challenging and uncertain times, because it's built to adapt, as we always have for millennia, and find new ways to create community, new ways to create community when we need it most, when we need it more than ever. And that's really what we've done tonight, I think, in this past half hour or so, and the past 2.5 hours since we began together with Cantor Gurney, is created a community, even if we're not sitting in the same room together. But this is Jewish community, and our ability to find new ways to create it is what will, ensure that we're here for generations to come. So I thank everybody for spending a little bit of your Shavuot evening with me. I know Rabbi Leader's up in just a few minutes. We have a couple minutes left. So if you have a question, if you have a thought or a comment and you want to drop it into the chat, I'll be happy to speak to it. I'm gonna read here. Great. Margie Blatt said a few minutes ago that in my discussion as to whether or not this idea of behavior over belief, Margie says that, well, isn't doing the behavior an actualization of the belief in those values? Absolutely. In many cases, it can be. My point is simply to say that Judaism privileges the behavior over the belief. Obviously, in an ideal world, they go hand in hand. We have a certain belief, and that leads us to behave in a certain way. But that if we had to choose, that if the belief does not lead to a behavior, you know, that I would say, for lack of a better way to put it, is probably not very Jewish. So I know we're in for a treat with Rabbi Leader. So Steve, I will turn it over to you if you're here. I think you are.
Okay, I'm here.
All right.
Is this working?
How was the drive?
I can't believe I did this. You know what? It was maddening. Believe it or not, COVID or no, there was traffic. It was terrible. Yeah, it took me over 3 hours.
I was going to say, I thought it should take you an hour and a half. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
every time I go out, I'm shocked with all the cars on the road, where people are going. But,
I don't know. And there were accidents and it was a mess. I don't know. Anyway, am I live now, or are they going to put me on?
I believe so. Yes, you are live now.
I'm live. Okay. I still see mostly you. Hi. I see I'm live, Jody. That's good. Hi, everyone.
So we're set up as a webinar. So we have, you can't actually see everybody. We've got about 80 folks with us.
Okay, I see you. Okay, all I see is
what better could there be to see?
All right, I just see my own little, okay. All right, I see everyone telling me I'm live. So, okay, I'm just gonna begin. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Great to see everyone. If I'm not, hold on. Okay, now Bo is off. I don't know how to make myself the full screen. Okay. All right. Very good. This is set up in a way that those of you who want to ask questions, raise your hands, whatever you want to do, you can do it. I'm going to move pretty quickly because the topic is limitless. Just to let you know where I am, I'm in a funky old 1950s cabin in Joshua Tree in the middle of the desert. I'm here for 5 days to finish the second to last, I hope, draft of my next book. So I'm I think it's the perfect thing to be doing over Shavuot, is being in the desert and thinking about books. Anyway, let's begin. So my topic is the beginning. There's, many of you know, there's a thing called Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which is an all-night study session on Shavuot. And traditionally, many of them have a kind of curriculum attached to them, and they almost all begin with Breshit, with the story of creation, which kind of makes sense. So we're going to talk about the story of creation tonight, and I'm going to delve into some of its, I think, deeper meanings that I think also many of them relate in a very interesting way to this pandemic. So let's begin. We're going to begin with the very first word. And those of you who are part of my Torah study class, you know that sometimes we never get beyond a single word. So the first word of the entire Torah, the name of the book, the name of the story of creation, the name of the first parsha, is Bereshit. And normally people think of this first word of this first verse as, you know, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's how the King James Version translated it. And that's even what most Jews think this word Bereshit means. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. However, there's a lot of dispute about whether that's really the correct translation of that word and the first verse. So let me read you first the Chabad Chumash, the Chabad Hebrew Bible translation of Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. The Chabad translation is, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. In the beginning of God's creating. The Reform movement's Torah commentary and translation says, when God began to create. Now, what is the difference between in the beginning God created and in the beginning of God's creating, or when God began to create? The difference obviously is in the first, in the King James translation. Creation is seen as a process that began on day 1, was completed on day 6, and the world was handed over to humankind fully formed, completely created, job done. Here, this is yours. These other translations imply a much more evolutionary process. It makes room, by the way, for science, which I think there ought to be room for in Torah. Think about this concept of when God began to create, right? That means that creation is an ongoing process, that it's an evolutionary process. And that has profound implications for the role of human beings, individuals, and humanity as a whole in this process of creation. It means that just like God, as imagined by our ancestors, having this creative power, we too, human beings, we also have the power to create, and therefore, and here's where the COVID issue comes in, and the power to destroy. In this sense, we are almost God in miniature, or the way I and most Reformed Jews tend to think of it, we're in a partnership with God. That God began something that it's our responsibility to continue. Literally, the creation of the world. And if you look at human history, we do continue to create, and sadly, we also destroy. There's a Midrash, Midrash Rabbah, Breshit Rabbah, where God is showing Adam and Eve around the world, around the garden, and God says to them, this is yours, take care of it, because if you destroy it, there will be no one to make it right after you. And I think we're all experiencing proof right now, proof of the fact that human behavior can actually change the course of nature, can change the entire planet. And frankly, at some point in the future, human beings will probably have the ability to change the other parts of the universe, of the cosmos. So this makes us partners with God, which is ennobling, but it is also an extraordinary degree of responsibility, an awful lot of weight on our shoulders to make intelligent and loving and thoughtful choices in what we choose to create. So much of nature, so many of the elements have within them the potential for good and the potential for bad. On the simplest level, think about the sun for a moment. It warms us. We need it. It can also give us skin cancer. It can also be part of the problem of global warming. So there's a duality to nature, much of which depends on God and much of which depends upon us. In other words, the bad news is human beings brought this virus, but human beings will also have the ability to control it and manage it somehow. So this is what it means for us. Now I want to move on from this idea of being partners in something that is evolutionary to the way in which God creates. God creates in the Torah with words. Vayomer Elohim yehi or vayehi or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. A lot of people know that word abracadabra, where magicians do something and before they do it, they say abracadabra. It comes from the Aramaic, abarakadabra. I create as I speak. And it's reflective of this idea that in the story of creation, God uses words to create the material. He uses the immaterial to create the material. And without overstating the case, one of the things I think we're all finding out now, because of the failure of some of our leaders and because of the courage and brilliance of some of our leaders now, how important words are and how powerful they are in their ability to create certain realities. And this goes all the way back to the Torah and the material power of words. Some of you have heard me talk about gossip before in sermons or in my teaching. You've heard me point out that the Hebrew word for word is davar. That is also the Hebrew word for thing. It's noun. It is impossible in Hebrew to separate words from things. They're seen as having material, concrete import. And this goes all the way back to the story of creation, where God literally speaks the world into being. Speaks the world into being. I don't know of any religious tradition that places more emphasis on the word and the power of language to create than Judaism. Now, I've got to move fast, and we'll take questions at the end. The next interesting thing, at least to me, is we've already talked about how on day one, God says, let there be light, and there's light. It isn't until day 4 that God creates the sun and the moon. Now think about that for a moment. Light is created before the sun. Now, our ancestors were not fools. Our ancestors who wrote the Torah were not fools. Sometimes we think because people lived a long time ago, they weren't sophisticated. They were profoundly sophisticated. They had much more time to think about things than we do. They knew they were crafting a myth for us many, many, many centuries later. They knew they were crafting a myth in which light was created 3 days before the sun. This, I think, is a very deep spiritual notion, a message to us that do not think for a moment that the sun is the source of its own power. The sun is merely a vessel for God's power. Everything emanates from the one. Of course, this was a critique of sun worshipers, of idolaters. But I think it's more spiritually profound even than that there is a meta being behind all things. There's a meta reality. And God is that one, that single unifying principle and force and power behind all of existence, the power behind the power of the sun. I heard Bo earlier talking about the Shema. To me, this is the most important insight that Judaism brings, that all is one. Most creation myths are about how the world is created through conflict, through dichotomous tension. The sun god at war with the moon god, the sea god at war with the land god, the love god at war with the hate god. That reality is sustained through the dichotomous tension of conflict. And Judaism comes along and says, no, all is one. The world, the earth, all of existence was created in a single harmonious way by a single power behind all powers. And this, to me, is Judaism's great contribution to human thought. Now, let's move on. Another very interesting thing to me in the story is the order in which things are created. And if you think of order as hierarchical, which of course it is, that's definitionally what order means, you'll notice that sea creatures, creatures that live in the water, and then land animals, including insects, swarming insects, worms, everything, all these animals and creatures are created before human beings. And the rabbis point this out. They think about this and they talk about this. And again, in Midrash Rabbah, they say, why is it that the insects were created before human beings? And the rabbis essentially turn it into a lesson about humility. That the reason for creation. Human beings are not any more or any less important than any other creature or plant on earth. It's a lesson in humility. Let's move to Job. Many of you know the story of Job. Job is this pious man, not a Jew, by the way. He's an everyman. He's a pious man, believes in God, He's faithful to God. And God and Satan have a bet. You know, God is bragging about Job one day, and he says, "You see my servant Job? He's a wonderful guy. He's very faithful." And Satan says, "Well, yeah, of course he is. He has a wonderful life. Make him suffer, and he'll turn on you in a minute." So God takes the bet and makes Job suffer. He loses his family, he loses his health, he loses his business. He's miserable. His friends come and tell him, "Job, you must have been bad. God is punishing you." And Job says, "To the contrary, I've been very good." And Job protests his innocence, and he finally gets his day in court with God. And essentially, what God says to Job is, "Are you big? I am. I make it rain where no person lives." I'm quoting Job now, the book of Job. I'm quoting God in the book of Job. God says to Job, "I make it rain where no human being lives." This is exactly like the Midrash on the story of creation about why insects were created before human beings. This is God saying to Job, it's not all about you. It's not all about human beings. There are other forces at work in creation. There are other priorities at work on the planet and in the universe and in the cosmos. Have some humility. Know your place. I don't know about all of you, but I have never in my life been reminded of the vulnerability of human beings, of my own vulnerability, of the simple fact that we are just part of a very large and complex story. I have never felt that more than during this COVID-19 crisis, where an unseen molecular sized virus has the potential to destroy an enormous number of human beings. And in a way, it's God's speech to Job. You're not in control. This is not about you. You're a part of something much bigger than you, and you are vulnerable, and you are only human. I see the story of creation as a story meant to humble us, to let us know we are small. And I don't think there's any arguing that in this current environment. And now I want to move on. So we've kind of moved through some of the days of creation. I want to move on now to the last day of creation. I said earlier that the world was created in 6 days, but I actually believe that it was 7 days. We all know that on the seventh day, it says God ceased to create and rested. And that posits that somehow rest is not its own creative process, that it's really not generative, which we all know is not the case. It is its own creation. Ceasing to create is its own creation. Some of you saw me talk about this on television the other day. I've written about it before. Here again, I think, is one of the most profound insights of Torah that we can superimpose over our own lives. And that's this idea of creating through cessation, creating by ceasing to create. The best way to understand this, if you're a certain age and you were born and raised before digital photography, you know what a negative is, or you've seen a piece of film. A negative creates an image by actually showing you what's not there. That's why it's called a negative. It shows you the negative space, and the negative space reveals the image. For when I teach this to kids who've never, ever seen a piece of film in their lives, I go to a much older example, a metaphor, which is a statue which is carved out of a block of marble. That beautiful statue was always within the marble, but a lot of things had to be removed in order for it to be revealed. To me, this is Shabbat. Shabbat is very much about what we remove from our lives. There are very few thou shalt in Shabbat. Yes, you're supposed to light candles, and you're supposed to do Kiddush, and you're supposed to eat challah, and you're supposed to study, and you're supposed to pray. However, most of the rules of Shabbat are about what's forbidden, what you have to remove from your life, because the rabbis understood the seventh day of creation. They understood that removal, cessation, pausing is its own form of creation, because something quite beautiful fills that space when you stop. I'm out here in the middle of the desert under the stars, not to add to my life, but subtract from it, so that I'm able to create. And this is, in a sense, what God does. And I cannot think of a time in my life, any of our lives, when we have been shown more starkly what can emerge when we stop creating, when we pause. I think it's a dirty little secret of this pandemic. I think it's a thing many of us feel, but feel guilty saying, which is, there are many aspects of being hunkered down at home that we're enjoying, frankly, enjoying more than our previous hectic, frenetic, frenzied lives. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not dismissing the pain and suffering. The reason that we're in this pause, the reason that we're creating by ceasing to create is a terrible reason. And I don't have anything good to say about it. However, the result of it, for many of us, is that it's stripping away nonsense and revealing something quite powerful and beautiful in its stead. There's a saying that they use in the military, and that is also taught to ER doctors, which I really love. And the saying is, don't just do something, stand there. Don't just do something, stand there. Pause, look, observe, ponder. And these things can only be done in stillness. And this comes directly from this idea of the seventh day of creation, of creating by ceasing to create. I'll tell you a beautiful little piece of Talmud that I'm going to riff on for just a minute, and then I'll be happy to take questions. There's a whole discussion in the Talmud about when the Messiah will arrive. What does it take to bring about the coming of the Messiah? And the Messiah, as I think most of us know, is the harbinger of an everlasting utopian existence, like heaven on earth. And there's a machloket, there's a debate in the Talmud, and one group of rabbis says, well, when everyone celebrates Shabbat one time, simultaneously all over the world, the Messiah will arrive. And some of the rabbis say, no, it has to be 2 Shabbatot, it has to be 2 weeks in a row. And many people understand this little conversation in the Talmud to mean, well, the Messiah will come as a reward for celebrating Shabbat universally. I don't see it that way. The way I understand it is that the Messiah will come, this utopian existence, this heaven on earth will arrive, not as a reward for celebrating Shabbat universally, but as a consequence of celebrating Shabbat universally. In other words, we can create heaven on earth by ceasing to create. Now I'm going to go even further. There's also this notion that when the Messiah arrives, we will all be doing for an eternity whatever it is we were doing the moment the Messiah arrived. Another reason to be celebrating Shabbat when the Messiah arrives, right? Do you really want to be in traffic for an eternity if the Messiah arrives? Do you want to be shopping? Do you want to be standing in line? Do you want to be working? Do you want to be arguing with your spouse and your kids when the Messiah arrives? No. So you should be doing on Shabbat the kinds of things you want to be caught doing when the Messiah arrives as a consequence of Shabbat, because you're going to do it for an eternity. And I think those are the kinds of things a lot of us are finding the time and the inclination to do now. So another beautiful example of the power of the pause that we're all in right now. And again, I want to be very clear. I do not for a moment mean to dismiss the pain and suffering, the reason behind this pause. And as I often say, these painful experiences aren't worth the lessons derived, but neither are they worthless. I want to end now where I began, and then take a few questions if people have them. We began with this idea that if you translate, in my view, properly the first verse of Torah, creation is a partnership between God and human beings, and it is an evolutionary process, and that human beings, like God, have the power to create and to destroy. And I really hope that this pandemic will wake us up to this fact that we are all partners in this global community and in this environment we call our planet, the planet Earth, our home for all of us. And that we as partners will do our parts, each of us, to redeem the earth and each other. And that's really my hope and my prayer on this Shavuot. So I'm going to end with that so we have time for questions and comments. I think I need to do something to see my questions and comments. Let me see. Okay, I don't see any questions or comments right now. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question? Okay, I see Jeff. Go ahead. I don't see the question though. Let me see. Maybe I can.
I don't know which Jeff it is, but
go ahead. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Well, the idea of man and his partnership with God to create the ongoing and the power of words. One of the Torah stories that always has troubled me about God's abuse of language is the Tower of Babel, when he separates 70 languages so no one can communicate with himself or her family. And the question becomes, again, though we can't explain the motivations of God, it doesn't look like a very positive action to me.
Well, I think if I could answer for God, which of course is the most arrogant thing I've probably ever said in my life, and you know I mean it in a certain way. I have always understood the Tower of Babel to be about domain, that it was an act of tremendous arrogance on the part of humanity, and that if you read the rabbi's understanding of the building of the Tower of Babel, that there was tremendous abuse and punishment meted out. It was the desire of human beings to become God, to be not just God-like, but God in creating this tower. And it was a great, I use this word deliberately, leveling event. It was a lesson in humility. No different than, by the way, there's a great book by Bill McKibben called Enough, where he talks about the dangers of cloning, for example. There are domains where human beings do not belong. And I think I've always understood the Tower of Babel to be just that. This is not where you belong. And so God confounds and slows and reminds human beings. And in fact, even builds in, for example, a set of breaks, this confounding language, to prevent human beings from their own hubris and arrogance. So that's how I understand it. I don't see it as cruel. And by the way, I think today, that the multiplicity of languages adds a tremendous amount of richness to the world. I don't think it detracts. But I understand the story of the Tower of Babel as a message from God that only God is God. We may be God's partner, but we're not God, and we we crossed over into the wrong domain. I hope that's helpful. I see that Mitch has a question and then Lisa has a question. So Mitch, why don't you go ahead? Mitch Dorff, I think. Somebody unmute him.
Yep. Hi. Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi, great. You just mentioned about this time of pause that we're in.
Yes.
God has created. And of course, it's created a lot of division, first politically, but now I find that it's becoming even more socially within one's own community, between those with the means to work or in the haves that can or don't
Yes.
have to work versus the have-nots. And I was wondering if you can
Yes.
address that and how the longer this goes, the more that will become diverse in our own community.
Yeah. The pause is not entirely positive, Mitch, obviously. The idea of pausing, I think, is positive. The idea of pausing the entire economy obviously does tremendous damage. And that's what I meant earlier when I said none of these lessons are worth the price that people have to pay. I'm merely saying they're not worth less. And I think the way I would think about this is that this is an overly extreme pause, but Shabbat is not an overly extreme pause. You can spend 1/7 of your life in this pause. And that's the goal. You know, God didn't create for 1 day and rest for 7. God created for 6 and ceased to create for 1. So the proportion of the story of creation is important, because I agree with you, Mitch. The idea of a pause 7 days a week for months is just crushing. I just heard driving here today, there are 41 million Americans recently unemployed. 41 million. By the way, my son happens to be one of them. So I do not want to dismiss the pain. What we are seeing now is grossly disproportionate to what I believe the story of creation had in mind, which was 1/7 of our lives can be lived in the pause. So I hope that's helpful. Lisa, I think, had a question. Am I right? Maybe?
Wow. Hello?
Okay, go ahead.
Can you
Hi,
hear
go
me?
ahead. I can hear you. I
Oh,
can,
wow.
yeah.
Hi, Rabbi Leader. How are you? Okay.
Hi, I'm doing fine. Good to hear
Good.
you.
Okay. It's working. I have a question. Can you, could you please maybe expand on what you're saying for people who are living alone through this? Because it's, you know, everybody
Yeah.
talks about their
Yes.
family time, but if nobody's in the house, it's very different.
Yes, it is. That includes my mother in Minneapolis, by the way. Yes, and so I think that the difficulty we're having here is I think I presented this in a way that people I think are seeing this idea of Shabbat as something that I think works in a pandemic also, and that's really not my point. Shabbat was meant to be 1/7 of our lives, not 100% of our lives, especially if we're alone. And can't, by the way, I should say also, and I think most of us know this, Shabbat is not something to be spent in isolation. You have to, for example, be part of a minyan on Shabbat for, you know, just for starters, and Shabbat and have people at your Shabbat table. So in no way is this a glorification of solitude. Or of being alone, because I agree with you. I think that's terrible. In fact, since we're talking about the story of creation, one of the things God says in this Torah portion is it's not good for man to be alone. It's painful. And I would say the best now. So I hope I've been clear that Shabbat is not to be spent alone, and it's not something that we should spend our entire lives in. In terms of how to get through this alone, I will tell you this, that the Talmud says the prisoner cannot free himself. The prisoner cannot free himself. You have to reach out as much as you can and in as many ways as you can. Technology, I was driving here today talking to somebody who is pretty highly placed at Cedars, and he was talking to me about how much worse this would have been 25 or 50 years ago without the internet, without technology. So Lisa, what I can say to you is you've got to reach out as much and as often as you can. And by the way, you can call me and Zoom me anytime you want.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I mean that.
Thank you.
Do not, no one suffers better alone. No one. So the prisoner cannot free himself, and we're all prisoners right now. So we've got to keep reaching out.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Now I'm cognizant of the time because we have one more. Rabbi Nickerson is on deck. It's going to come up to the plate, knock it out of the park for everybody. Thank you everyone for being a part of this. I promise you, all your rabbis and cantors, we're going to keep teaching, and we're all going to keep growing and moving through this together. And I'm wishing all of you a Chag Sameach, and thank you so much for being a part of this. I really enjoyed being with you tonight. And now let's go to Rabbi Nickerson.
Yeah, one last question, Rabbi Leader.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
I notice, the one thing about these Zoom things, you always look at what you see behind the person speaking. I notice a guitar back there. Is that your guitar?
No, this is like, I rented this place at Airbnb, and it's this fantastic hippie pad. If you walked in here, you would swear it was 1974 right now. There's a turntable. There's a stack of vinyl. There's macrame plant holders. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's giving me PTSD from junior high school, though. That's the only thing.
I hope you can actually get work done.
I can give you a quick, hold on. Can you still see me?
Yeah, let's see the tour.
Okay, look, I'll give you guys a little tour. So here's my funky, it's a cabin that was built in the 50s, and then I don't think much has been done since the 70s. Look at that light fixture over there. Isn't that classic?
Wow.
So this is where I'll be for the next 4 or 5 days trying to write. The ceiling, and you see? Yeah. So, it's pretty great. It's old school. I love it.
That's great.
All right, take it away, man.
Good luck with the writing.
Thank you so much. Chag Sameach. I'm going to watch you for a while. Go ahead.
Oh.
No pressure.
All right.
No pressure.
No pressure. Of course, none. Well, hello. Chag Sameach, everyone. Really nice to be with all of you. So you've made it this far. If you've made it this far, you deserve a pat on the back. So pat yourself on the back. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, since it is called Late Night Shots with the Rabbi, with some Torah, we have to have a little bit of l'chaim. So as I was thinking about what would be an appropriate Shavuot l'chaim drink, I mean, there's so many options. Do you go with something that has dairy in it? I'm not really a fan of having a drink with dairy in it late at night, but I was thinking about tequila, because tequila, if you think about it, made out of agave, made in the desert, in the wilderness. Think about where we receive Torah. We receive Torah in the wilderness, in the desert. So that's why I chose tequila tonight. So I'm going to pour a little bit of tequila for this evening's little shiur, this little lesson. If you've been here through all of these sessions, as I have, you've noticed that there's such a wide array of depth and knowledge of this team that I'm very proud to be a part of it. And so nice that you're still with me this late in the evening. Though if you were in a more traditional setting, this would be just the start of your evening and you have a long way to go. Here's what we're going to do tonight. We are going to look at a few R-rated stories in the Torah. It's an interesting way to end the evening. Maybe you would imagine that you would be ending the evening studying with your clergy about something as uplifting as what Rabbi Leader just offered you. But instead, we're going to end with what has been addressed earlier, which is the struggle that exists within our tradition. Rabbi Shapiro mentioned this as well, this idea of the struggling of what it means for us as the people of Israel to struggle with God, to struggle with our tradition. There are pieces of our Torah that are not so peaches and cream and milk and honey, right? There are pieces of our Torah that are disturbing, that are troubling, that are things that we as educators don't necessarily teach those children when they're in religious school growing up. However, one of the most important things that I found for those of us who want to be learned Jews and those who want to really understand the complexity of our tradition, you can't ignore those stories. you have to delve into them. You have to start to struggle with them. And even some of the stories that maybe over time you've been slightly exposed to, once you start to get into them a little more, not only do you see the depth of them, and not only do you see that they're not just to be ignored and kind of sloughed off, but really that the human condition is being explored and revealed to us through these troubling stories. And so I find that it's just as important to study those as it is to study the nice, beautiful stories in our tradition. So there are many to choose from. And if we were to go into the Talmud and some of the other rabbinic traditions, we have a vast array. So there are many more years of Shavuot studying for us ahead of us for those. But today we're going to focus on a few stories. We'll see how far we get because we don't have all night, though I could be here all night. You know, my kids are already asleep. We'll see if I wake them up if I get too into this. But tonight I want us to look at a few stories, ones that I think are on the cusp of what are known stories, but the pieces that you weren't necessarily exposed to. And here's what I would like you to do. I'm going to be sharing the stories on the screen with you so you can kind of read along. And then I'm going to give a little bit of my own insights at the end. If you want to share your own insights or you have your own reflections, as you've already done throughout the evening, you can raise your virtual hand. You can type it in the Q&A section. You can type it in the chat, and we'll see what our timing is like in terms of what we get to. But I want you to think about, how does this relate to my own life? How does this relate to the world today? Because I think all these stories have elements that we can relate to. Okay, shall we get started? Let's do it. Okay, first story comes from almost the very beginning of Genesis. Soon after Rabbi Leader's conversation about the creation of the world, we have the first destruction of the world, which comes with Noah and the ark. Now, we all know the story of Noah and the ark. Already we imagine, at least when I grew up, I imagined the story of Noah and the ark as this beautiful ark with the two giraffes with their heads way up above everything else, right? And they're floating on this pristine, beautiful water. And then all of a sudden there's a rainbow in the sky and we realize we are safe and that God is never going to destroy the world again. Of course, if you were to really think realistically about what that scene was like, imagining the entire world being flooded, it would probably be a scene full of bloated dead bodies of humans and animals, and the stink would be terrible, and it would be cloudy and overcast, and it would not be a pristine situation. So that's the setting of the stage for the story that comes next, because Noah is in that ark with his family with a heck of a lot of animals, but then finally that dove comes and he is able to go back onto dry land. Do you know what Noah does with his time as soon as he gets onto dry land? This is the story of what he does. And it's a really disturbing and important story. I would say even more so, especially given what we're experiencing with this stay at home, right? We've been quarantined at our homes for months. Imagine that Noah was in the same situation. He was stuck in his home, which was this ark, with his animals, AKA potentially children, or AKA anything else. It could be an animal. It could just be the sense of being stuck. If as Lisa Beth referenced in the session before here, there are people who are home alone, right? But there is still this sense of being stuck by yourself in the small space. So Noah was in that same situation. He comes out of that, and this is what he does. Okay. The sons of Noah came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham being the father of Canaan, these three were the sons of Noah. And from these three, the whole world branched out. Right now we are coming out of the ark after the flood, and these are Noah's three sons. Noah, the tiller of soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. So first of all, I realized I poured myself a shot and we didn't do a l'chaim. So we have to do a l'chaim, but first, we've studied all this Torah. We need to say the blessing for studying Torah before we go any further. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for giving us this opportunity to engage in the study of Torah. L'chaim. Now I'm ready. Okay, back to the story. He drank of the wine and became drunk. and he uncovered himself within his tent, AKA he gets naked. He is so drunk that he is to the point where he is just throwing off his clothes and passing out naked. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. So one son comes in, sees his father passed out naked. Now, already this is a disturbing story, because anyone who ever has seen their parent naked or has ever envisioned their parent naked knows that you never want to do either one of those things, right? Those are two images. Either you've seen it or you've thought about it and you've thought, I never want to see that, right? Here we have a son who is seeing his father sprawled out naked, passed out drunk. What does he do? Now, the first son decides that he's going to go out and tell his brothers, an understandable thing to do. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they did not see their father's nakedness. Okay, I want to pause here again. Let's go back even further. The first thing that Noah does when he comes out of the ark is he plants a vineyard and he gets blitz drunk. Now, there are many people and many occasions in our own lives where we are overwhelmed by the challenges of the world around us in our own lives, and we just want to drown that out, right? And Noah does exactly that. He was cooped up in that ark with his family and all those animals for a very long time. And what he has cooped up inside him psychologically, he decides that the way that he wants to deal with that is to basically forget it all by getting drunk and passing out, right? There is a healthy way of dealing with challenge, and there is an unhealthy way of dealing with that. And I think what our story already is teaching us, the Torah, so early on in the story, as you saw, Genesis chapter 9, is already teaching us that we are going to be facing in our lives all kinds of really disturbing challenges. And you have a variety of journeys that you can go on in order to deal with those challenges. Are you going to take a healthy path, or are you going to try and drown that out with drugs or alcohol or other things that will hopefully blur the pain and suffering that you've gone through? That's what Noah is doing. Noah is already trying to blur all of that and get rid of the experience that he had, okay? And on top of that, now he's exposing his children, because one of the challenges that we face with the pain and suffering that we go through in our own lives is that it isn't just locked in our own minds, right? This is something that we deal with that expands beyond our own life to our family, to our friends, etc. So this is something that we need to be keeping in mind, especially for all of us who have been locked up in our own ways. And we may have gotten into bad habits. We may have accelerated habits that weren't so great beforehand. We may have taken on new habits. I know there's already some research out there about all of these things, but in our own lives, I think this is an appropriate story for us to be thinking about, okay? So his children are exposed to this. His first child runs away and goes and tells his brothers, because his first child doesn't want to even deal with that, because to see your parent vulnerable is something that's very upsetting, right? Think about the time that you've seen your parent cry. Think about a time, maybe, unfortunately, when you've seen a parent drunk or out of control. That's a very disconcerting experience for a child, especially, or even a grown child, right? So here we have already one response, which is when you see someone that you care about in a state of vulnerability or in pain, or when they're trying to blur out the reality of the world around them, you may want to just go away and not deal with it and go have someone else deal with it. That's what the first son does. Let's see again what the second two sons do. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they did not see their father's nakedness. All right, so now the other two brothers, they go in, they try as respectfully as possible to cover their father's nakedness. They don't want to see their father's nakedness. They're literally backing up, right? Both, we could assume, out of respect, and also, let's be honest, they don't want to see their father naked. Now, when Noah wakes up from his wine, probably completely hungover, and learned what his youngest son had done, right? The one that came into the tent first, Ham or Ham. When he learns what he'd done, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves shall be to his brothers." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, let Canaan be a slave to them. May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them." All right, so he curses his son. He curses the one who turned his back, literally, on his father and walked out. There are a lot of different ways we can look at this story. We can look at this from the angle of Noah. Here's a really troubled, traumatized man who tried to save the world, and the only way he could deal with that was to drown himself in drink. And his disappointment in his son's inability to be a bigger man, right? And that by turning his back and going and embarrassing him by telling the brothers and having the brothers come in, that was a problem. You could also see it from the son's perspective as well. Regardless, this is a story that teaches us a lot of lessons about the challenges of trauma and how we deal with the challenges and vulnerabilities and struggles in our own lives. So yes, it's not necessarily X-rated, but this is a story that you can imagine is something that happens all the time in the world today, right? And that's what makes it R-rated, because the whole theme of this session is about R-rated stories. Stories that, and something that is R-rated is something that is mature, right? Something that really gets to the maturity and the challenges of the world around us. And the Torah is already doing that at chapter 9. A piss-ass drunk Noah, who is so upset with his life that he has to just drown it all out, and the implications on his children, and then the curse that he makes on his son's future generations based on this, right? The sons, the sins of the father really playing out for generations to come. How are we making sure that our own deficiencies aren't going to play out in a way that are going to impact our children and the future generations, right? We all have those things that are inside us that are bubbling up, right? There are those times where we have that anger or we have that pain. How are we going to make sure that we're not passing that down in a way that is destructive, or in a way in which we feel as though we need to curse the next generation, right? So this is a really troubling story from a man that usually, right, this is about turning these stories on its head, in my opinion, right? To find the complexity within it. Noah is not just this nice little character who God tells him to build an ark, and so he builds an ark, and then voila, the world is saved and there's a beautiful rainbow. No, this is a really troubling story. This is not a story that our children are really understanding in the depth of. But as adults, oh, we have a real responsibility to understand this. We have a real obligation to understand what this story is really telling us. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the next story. By the way, if you have comments or questions or things that I want you to just kind of type them out, and then maybe we'll do a debrief at the end. So think about, now we've covered Noah. We're going to do one more. Gosh, it's already 10:20. We're definitely not going to get to all the stories. I'll have to save them for next Shavuot. But let's go to another story. Also another story from Genesis. By the way, since Genesis, the way I see Genesis is really about family dynamics. That's what I believe is the real crux of the book of Genesis. After the creation of the world, we really have the creation of family structure, and we have all the complexities that come within the family dynamics built into the book of Genesis throughout our forefathers and our foremothers, throughout all of their lives and all their journeys. That's really what we're dealing with. Margie Blatt, Joel, what does this also tell us about Noah? His youngest son may have responded poorly, but what about Noah's curse? Okay, we'll get to that. Let's come back. I can't multitask so well. So let me focus on this, and then we'll come back to the question. So remind me, Margie, at the end. Okay, let's go to the next story. Next story is Lot. Now, you think of Lot, you probably remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but you may not be aware exactly of how Lot fits into this. He is related to Abraham, and he is kind of at the core of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. and the really disturbing story that comes at the end of Sodom and Gomorrah after they're destroyed. But I want to give you a little bit of context. So we'll start when Sodom and Gomorrah are still alive, so to speak. So we have two angels that arrive in Sodom in the evening, and as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom, when Lot saw them, he rose and he greeted them, and he, bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet. Then you may be on your way early." But they said, "No, we'll spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So these two angels come to Sodom. Lot is sitting out there. He's like, "Come, stay with me." They say, "No, we'll stay outside." He says, "Not a good idea. Come into the house with me. I'll take good care of you." They had not yet lain down when the townspeople, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man, gathered about the house. Okay, you gotta imagine an entire town. So the nice thing, another great thing about these R-rated stories is they're perfect movies. I mean, I think most of the plots of the great movies that exist are built on biblical narratives. All right, so you have this entire town. Imagine just this throngs of men surrounding this house. And they shouted at Lot and said, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may be intimate with them." Right? They want to have sex with these angels. They don't know they're angels, but they want to overcome and overpower these men who came into the town. Right? So Lot went out to them into the entrance, shut the door behind him, and said, "I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please. But do not do anything to these men, since they have come under the shelter of my roof." Okay, so right here, Lot is willing to give up his virgin daughters to this group of men who would gang rape them, but he's not willing to give up these two men who they also want to gang rape. So already we have this really troubling situation of not only is Lot willing to give up his daughters, and we have the gender challenges that exist of power dynamics here, but we also have this idea of an entire town willing to ravage and take over these men or these women. But they said, "Stand back, the fellow," they said. "Come here." They came here as an alien, and already he acts the ruler. They're talking about Lot. "Now we will deal worse with you than with them." And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. In other words, they were going to take out their sexual aggression on those visitors, but now they want to teach Lot a lesson, and they want him to be the person who gets the brunt of their intimacy, so to speak. Okay, but the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, young and old, they struck with blinding light, so that they were helpless to find the entrance. So luckily, these angels kind of create this flashing light so that these men disperse. But otherwise, they were going to break down the door and rape all of them. Extremely troubling, totally messed up. And you can imagine now why Sodom was destroyed by God. We're going to see, though, that Lot's journey doesn't end here. First, he was willing to give up his daughters, right? He seemed pretty nice in the beginning. He's saying to these men, "Come and stay with me." Then he starts to turn. We start to see another element of him, which is, "I'm willing to give up my daughters to you." ... We take a little break. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Now the angels are telling him, "Get out while you can." As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zohar, now he had said, by the way, what happened in the ellipses there, he said to God, "You know what, please, I don't want to run to the mountains. Can you let me go to that town Zohar over there so that I can be safe there?" And God said, "Okay." So now he enters that town after the town, Sodom and Gomorrah, have been destroyed. The Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he annihilated those cities and the entire plain and all the inhabitants of the city and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. Now that's usually where we end our understanding of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, Lot's wife, who turns into a pillar of salt, that funky story that we hear, that's usually where we end the story. However, it doesn't end there. It gets more disturbing. Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his two daughters. for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. And the older one said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that he may maintain life through our father, that we may maintain life through our father. That night, they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with his father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day, the older one said to the younger, see, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. And that night also, they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. It's a really troubling story, and you can understand why we don't teach it in religious school. What are we supposed to do with a story like this? Again, we have wine playing a role in the story. We have the idea that these 2 young women who were scared, and we got a sense from Lot that he was scared of the world, right? So now they think that they are under this impression that there is no one else left in the world but them. They are in a cave, right? We think about the symbolic nature of a cave. We think about how a cave can be both a protective place, but it can also be a damp, dark, scary place, right? And we are in a cave right now as a society. We are in this cone that can either be feeling very comforting depending on our situation, or it can feel very overwhelming and dark and scary. Now, for these 2 young women, they felt as though the entire world was destroyed. There's a great Talmudic story about a father and a son who go into a cave. They don't have the sexual explicit nature of this, but they have this idea that they go into a cave because they don't know what's going on in the world, and they come out from the cave, and it's an entirely new world for them. But here, these 2 young women are in this cave with their father. They think there's no one else left in the world. So what do? They get their father drunk and they sleep with him. Totally disturbing. And I'm not bringing the story as a shock value. I'm really not. It is shocking. And I don't know how many of you actually were aware of the story or not. You may have heard tidbits about it. But the reason I bring it is because we can't ignore this story, right? We can't ignore the challenges that the Torah presents that are still issues that exist today. We still have challenges like this that exist today. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were challenges and the type of abuse that was going on in the world, especially as people were stuck at home, right? There are a lot of troubling things that our ancient ancestors and whoever wrote the Torah, and I firmly believe that the Torah was divinely inspired. I don't necessarily think that literally God wrote the Torah, but I think that whoever edited and put together this book had an insight that was divine. And I assume it's probably a group of people, because the ability to really capture the deep challenges of human nature and the complexities of our world and the struggles, all of it are built in. And we're only, what chapter are we on at this one? We're in chapter 19 of Genesis. We haven't even gotten that far into the Torah, and we're already faced with all of these challenges, right? So we're about to be out of time. I just realized it's 10:28. I could go on forever. We didn't even get to 3/4 of the stories that I was hoping we'd get to. I want to leave just a little bit of room for any comments or questions. But what I want you to take away is not the shock value of these stories. What I want you to take away is that the Torah has insights not only to the beauty of the world in which we live, but it has insights into the challenges and the destructive qualities of the world that we also cannot ignore, that we have a responsibility to open our eyes to those things so that we know how to deal with them, so that we know how to confront them, so we know how not to repeat the same mistakes, so that we understand that if we want to emerge from this cave, if we want to emerge out into the world, into a place that is not being destroyed by fire symbolically, that we have to understand our value system in a way that can give us strength into the future, right? So that's why I'm bringing this. And there are so many more stories that I hope we can explore together that will give us this opportunity to understand that the pain that can be that can come out of these stories can also give us strength. Okay, enough of me talking. You are the last people here. I have a couple people saying keep going, and surprisingly, there's still like more than 50 people who are still on the stream. So you know what? I'm gonna keep going. I just because I've given in to the peer pressure. However, of course, for those of you who want to drop off and go have a schluff and have a nice sleep, I wish you the best. But now this is the extra credit session for those who are sticking around beyond the time that has been allotted, right? It's interesting because Judaism is all about boundaries, and it's about putting a fence around the Torah, for example. And at the same time, we're really good at figuring out ways of going through that fence and continuing on the journey, even though there are rules established. So, by the way, this is why I wanted to go last, right? Because if you go last, you have the opportunity to go on longer. And if no one was here and I was just talking to myself, that's okay. It's okay. I still get to learn. And that's one of the wonderful things that I love doing. And I know that there are probably a few people, well, unfortunately, people like Don Levy and Jessica Reisenberg would have to stick around until I finish up. So I appreciate them sticking around, hopefully just a little bit longer. And thank you for all of you. Okay. I don't know if these are actual hands that were left over from before or not. So I'm going to do one more story. It's slightly longer, and then I'll take any questions and insights, and then we'll wrap it up. But since it is 10:30 and we are in the desert, because most of the book of Genesis and the book that we are in right now, if anyone remembers, the book of Bamidbar, which we are in the cycle of right now, is all about the wilderness. And the wilderness is a dark and scary place, and at the same time, a place of complete opportunity. You look up at those stars and there's nothing better than that. Okay, so l'chaim, to opportunity, to turning darkness and pain into an opportunity for us to find growth and strength. L'chaim. Okay, on to the next story. One more, even though I brought a lot more. Revenge for Dinah. You know what? I'm gonna skip that one. It's a good one, but I'm gonna skip it. I wanna go to this one only because Judah and Tamar is related. Quick background. Judah and Tamar, the reason I wanna end with this is this is a link to Shavuot through the story of Ruth. If you remember, the book of Ruth is what we read during Shavuot. Ruth is considered the first convert. She's also considered one of the precursors. Her descendant is King David. And this is really the start of that lineage, is through this story. And the story of the creation of the lineage that leads to King David comes out of deception. And it comes out of sexual deception from the story of Judah and Tamar. So that's why I want to share this. Plus, it also has the nice little sidebar of the story that is usually known as the reason why you're not supposed to masturbate, which of course is not really true, but many people use this story and elements of this story as the reason why you're not allowed to masturbate. Okay, for all those reasons, let's look at the story and then I will take your questions. Okay. About the time Judah left his brothers and camped near a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hirah, there Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he married her and cohabitated with her, and she conceived and bore a son and named him Er. Okay, so this man Judah, he's going to be a major player in the story. He married this woman. He has a son named Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and his name was Onan. And once again she bore a son, named him Shelah, and he was at Chazib when she was born. Okay, Judah has 3 sons. He has Er, Onan, and Shelah. They're all going to come into play later on in the story. So Judah got a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to the Lord. We don't know why. And the Lord took his life. So poor Tamar, she's left. She married this man, the son of Judah, and he's killed by God. We don't know why. Okay. Then Judah said to Onan, his middle son, join with your brother's wife and do your duty by her as a brother-in-law and provide offspring for your brother. So now, and this was traditional back then, that now the brother-in-law of Tamar is now supposed to marry her and have child with her, and so that they can pass on the lineage. But Onan, knowing that the seed would not count as his, let it go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife, so as not to provide offspring for his brother. In other words, he did not ejaculate inside her to have a baby, and instead he would do so otherwise. I guess it would be called, so weird to say, the pull-out method, right? That's what he's doing here. And what he did was displeasing to the Lord, and he took his life also. By the way, this is the onanism. If you've ever heard the word onanism, it comes from the story of Onan, and onanism is this idea, is linked to the idea of masturbation. So here, this is the story, and the story of Onan not going through with the process in order to conceive with his wife is the reason given as to why you shouldn't masturbate, because if you do, God will kill you. That's what comes from the story right here. Okay. I consider that an R-rated story, right? Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," because now his third son, he needs to wait until he grows up a little more before he can now give his son over to Tamar. This poor woman, right? Her first husband dies. The second one doesn't want to have a kid with her because he wouldn't get claim to that child. And now she has to wait for this third kid to grow up, third brother-in-law. He too might die like his brother. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. A long time afterwards, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. Okay. When his period of mourning was over, Judah went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers together with his friend Hira the Adullamite. And Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for the sheep shearing." It's been a while. Judah, who was the father of Onan and Er and Shelah, his wife dies. So now he's a widower, and he's going off to the sheep shearing party, whatever that may be. So he's coming up to Timnah. So she took off her widow's garb, because she's still a widow, covered her face with a veil, and wrapping herself up, sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him as a wife. Remember that kid that she was supposed to wait around for him to grow up, and that Judah was supposed to give him his third son. Well, this kid grew up, and Judah never gave him over. So poor Tamar is stuck in this widow status with an inability to have children to maintain the lineage. When Judah saw her, he took her for a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, "Here, let me sleep with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. "What," she asked, "will you pay for sleeping with me?" She's not telling him who she is. He replied, and by the way, she went there obviously on purpose to pull off this. He replied, "I will send a kid from my flock." But she said, "No, you must leave a pledge until you have sent it." In other words, it's not good enough that you're going to send me payment over Venmo later on. I need something now to make sure I can hold on to it. And then I can give it back to you once I get those sheep that you're promising me. He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your seal and cord and the staff which you carry. Give me the things that you literally have right now, things that are clearly marked by who you are. Give those to me." So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she conceived by him, right? So now we have this man, Judah, who sleeps with his daughter-in-law by not really knowing who she is, but he's in the mood on his way to the sheep shearing party. And so he sleeps with her, and there is this sexual power dynamic that's going on. And of course, a lot of deception that's happening as well. And she now is going to have a son with her father-in-law. So he gave them to her, and she slept with her, and he conceived by her. Then she went on her way. She took off her veil and again put on her widow's garb. So she played the role in order to get what she wanted, which was to have that child and to sleep with her father-in-law. I don't know how exciting that is. And then she moves on back with her life to get back in her good old clothing. Judah sent the kid by his friend to the Adullamite to redeem the pledge from the woman, but he couldn't find her. He inquired all around, "Who is that cult prostitute, the one by the road?" But they said there was no prostitute there, of course, because she wasn't the usual prostitute who just hung out there on the regular basis. So he returned to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her. Moreover, the townspeople said there's no prostitute here." So Judah said, "Let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. I did send her this kid, but you didn't find her. So I tried to do my part. I had sex with this woman. I was willing to pay, but I couldn't find her. So let's forget about it." About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot. In fact, she is with child by harlotry. All of a sudden, he hears through the grapevine that this daughter-in-law of his, who, by the way, is still a widow and is not married to anyone, is pregnant. Ugh, harlot. Bring her out, said Judah, and let her be burned. Okay, because it's an embarrassment to his household because he gave her 2 of his children and they died. And what's going on? She's going to be a bad name for his lineage. As she was being brought out, she sent this message to her father-in-law. I am with child by the man to whom these belong. And she added, examine these. Whose seal and cord and staff are these? Judah recognized them and said, she is more in the right than I am, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he was not intimate with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife tied a crimson thread to that hand to signify this one came out first. But just then he drew back his hand and came out his brother. Interesting. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. Afterwards, his brother came out, on whose hand was the crimson thread, and he was Zerah. Okay, long story, a lot of sexual deception here. And Perez is the ancestor of the man who Ruth marries in the book of Ruth. And they have a child together. And a few generations later is King David. So Perez is the ancestor of King David. And in between that lineage is the story of Ruth and her husband, Boaz, Boaz is a descendant of Perez. And so Ruth is tied to this lineage, and the creation of this lineage comes out of this really disturbing story about a man and his daughter-in-law sleeping together through sexual deception, which gives birth to the lineage that brings about King David. Wow. Talk about a movie. Right? Amazing. Okay. Let's end there and let's go to some questions. Okay. I'm going to assume Mitch Dorf has a question because the hand is up. Mitch, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'll get to my question in a second.
Or a comment.
Yeah, my comment, first of all, is this is better than any HBO Showtime special. This should be Rabbi Nickerson Blue After Dark. This is incredible. I guess my question, and by the way, L'chaim, I'm with you right now. My question is, you are at Genesis 38-ish.
Yeah.
You've given us 3 stories. You passed over 1, so there's 4 stories, and we're only in the first book, and we're not even all the way through it. How much of the Torah is full of all of this sexual tension, all these sexual stories that honestly, we gloss over this because at least in the Reform community, when it comes to bar mitzvahs, we're reading all kind of like the fluff stuff, none of this hardcore stuff. And I'm curious, in the Orthodox or the more observant community, when it comes for a bar mitzvah, are they getting into this stuff, or do they get into this stuff more midweek? And who edits it? Who chooses to edit this stuff out? And how does it all play out? Because obviously there's some serious stuff going on here.
Oh yeah, there's some serious stuff. I would say that I wouldn't say that in a more traditional community that B'nai Mitzvah students are necessarily getting into the nitty gritty of this, because I think part of the brilliance of the Torah is that there are various levels that you can go in with the stories, right? You could still read actually all of those stories. And I have pointed out to my B'nai Mitzvah kids who have the story of Noah about the story of him building a vineyard and getting drunk. And the way I frame it is as number one, I make a joke about you never want to see your parent naked, which is true. But also I talk about how, there are a lot of ways in which we try and deal with the difficult things in our life, and Noah dealt with it this way. And I try to open their eyes just a little, right, for some of these things. All of these stories, there are different levels, right? There's the whole idea of how you interpret Torah. There are 4 levels, and you start with the most basic and you go all the way down to the sod, right? The secret levels. Like there's certain levels that you can go deeper and deeper into how you interpret the Torah and how you interpret every story in the Torah. So in that case, I think what we're supposed to do pedagogically, educationally, with how we're supposed to teach these stories is you got to start with the basics, and you have to have people understand at a young age what's going on generally. But the problem that we have in our Jewish education system right now is that we haven't given the opportunity for people to slowly over time go deeper and deeper to get to this complexity by the time we're adults. And then we're left with the story of Noah as adults as just that beautiful, pristine image of the rainbow, when in fact, and what that does is does a disservice for us because we think that Judaism and the Torah is just kind of basically rated G, beautiful, optimistic view of the world, and we've started to live life and realize the world doesn't work that way. And so how is Judaism and this tradition and this Torah supposed to speak to me when I'm going through all this pain and dealing with all this crap in my life? And what we need to do a better job of is to, as we get older, to progress to these deeper levels, to help people understand that throughout the Torah, there are a lot of these stories, right? Genesis is jam-packed with them. Leviticus has them in a different way. Genesis, not as much. Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, is more about rebellion. It's not so much sexual stuff as it is about power dynamics and how to argue and complaining, and what does it mean to like be dissatisfied with the world in which you live, right? And how do you respond to that? And the positive ways you respond to that and the negative ways you respond to that. And then Deuteronomy kind of sets us up for the journey into the promised land, once we get into the promised land, and it's a review of everything before. But then you get into all the other books that come in the Tanakh. There's all kinds of stuff, right? There's a lot of war, there's a lot of famine, there's a lot of rebellion, there's all kinds of great stuff in here. So yes, there's a lot really in the beginning, but it's throughout, and we just haven't done a great job, unfortunately, of really helping ourselves see the depth and beauty of this tradition, the way that we're exposed to complexity on all the secular parts of our world. So we need to do a better job of that. That's my short answer to that. Thank you for the question, and I'm glad you find this enjoyable. That's great.
Well,
and thanks for sticking around.
I remember when I was living in Jerusalem, and I would go to yeshiva, and we would take one sentence of Torah and dissect it for like 2 or 3 hours, and you get to the numerology, and I go like, well, what you just talked, we didn't get into the Hebrew of it, but it's like, I'm not sure about dissection. That's pretty graphic stuff, as opposed to like a spray sheet where you can dissect it and you can get the numerology, and there's so much more overtones to it. This is pretty like cut and dry. This is like Joel Nickerson Blue After Dark. Serious stuff.
Yes, it's serious
really
stuff.
This is great. Keep reading.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks. Susan, I don't know where Susan went. I know she had a question. Susan Ehrlich, are you still there? Okay. Hi, Susan.
Yeah, I asked you some questions. I think it's great how you brought these two sexual stories in. Lot and his daughter. One daughter was the Moab, who is the Moabite, and Ruth was a Moabite.
Yes, thank you. I forgot to make that connection too. That was another reason I chose that. Yes.
Yeah, that was brilliant. And then Boaz, who was a descendant of Tamar from Perez, Judah and Tamar, Perez. And that's great. These two sexual stories come together in their descendants who live happily ever after. So.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? That's actually a really important point that, is there a way for us, if we're so much a people about hope, how can these disturbing stories not just try and remind us of how disturbing the world can be, but that there are things that can come down the line out of the pain and suffering that we go through, the trauma that we experience, or the trauma that we see around us, that there can be beautiful things down the line. We may not be able to see them in the moment. And it's not necessarily our responsibility to try in the midst of challenge to assume and try and project what the beautiful future could look like. However, I think as what we find is through these stories that I brought to you tonight, and as Susan pointed out, both of them have these links to a future, especially on Shavuot tonight, which is optimistic, right? And another thing that has come up over and over tonight in our studies throughout these sessions is this idea of what can you gain from from this time in COVID-19. I mean, Rabbi Eshel's session about your new 10 commandments. What do you want to hold on to make sure it's not on the cutting room floor? Rabbi Nanis's session about how throughout history, as she went through history, how we can find ways in which Jews have found a way to innovate, to pivot in order to find success. We've been doing it forever, right? It's not going to stop now. So how can we make sure that as we see these stories, we're not just reading them by themselves in a bubble, but that there is a broader picture that we can't lose sight of either. So thank you, Susan. I really appreciate it. Nice to learn with you twice in one day.
Yes.
Today. So yeah, thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Man, you guys stuck with me almost to the end, well, past the end. So I do want to say, unless there's, Jess, if Tamar's status is based on having children, do you see her more as a person simply fulfilling this cultural pressure, or as a woman with agency in a time where there is little? I always believe that that people have agency, and that the Torah does not dismiss that, right? That if this is a book and a teaching, meaning the Torah itself, about human agency and about free will, which is something I talked about in my Talmud class earlier today. Of course, Tamar is not just this simple person who is just kind of doing what she has to do to fulfill her duty. I don't think any of the characters actually in the Torah are just that two-dimensional. I think what we're supposed to learn here is that Tamar, as a woman, and I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to speak, beyond too much, but I do want to say, I think there are many powerful women in the Torah who subversively come up with ways of bringing in power, and sometimes they have to use their power the way they do. In this case, Tamar uses her sexual power in order to get what she needs to, and that for that time, that was the way it had to be done. Now, of course, we're in a different world today. However, I think what the Torah is teaching us is that no matter whether you're a woman or a man, it doesn't matter. What you have agency, you have a responsibility to not just stand idly by, but to really realize your own potential and your own power. And sometimes that power can be destructive, but sometimes that power can bring about King David, right? You never know what your power can do in this world. And you have a responsibility to recognize that every decision you make, as overwhelming as that may feel sometimes, every decision you make and every action you take has the potential to potentially bring about the Messiah, to bring about a new age, or to bring about destruction. And how can you be intentional with how you act in the world, how you treat other people, how you use your power in order to bring more good than bad. So with that, I think we are going to end it for tonight. I just want to again thank Don Levy and Jessica Reisenberg, who were behind the scenes this entire evening. So a Zoom clap for them, for all their hard work, for really producing this entire evening. Of course, to all the clergy who participated tonight and all their guests. I think Cantor Peacock was the only one who had guests tonight, but for all her guests, brilliant musicians. And for all of you for sticking around. I mean, there's still 44 of you who stuck around until 10:50 at night. So I appreciate that. On behalf of the entire Wilshire Boulevard Temple community and clergy and senior staff, want to wish you a Chag Sameach, a Shavuot full of insight, a Shavuot full of opportunities to think about how you can find your own Torah and your own teaching and how you can bring that into the world. So thank you very much and have a wonderful night, and know that you can pass this on to other people. We're going to restream the entire evening tomorrow for you or for anyone else you want to send this to. So thank you. Have a wonderful night. Have a good sleep, and l'chaim. Thank you.